Hey, what's up? It's cute what if this side. Today we will be seeing, what if Deku had immortality? Now before we move ahead with the fic, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Kaken. That's mean a stuttering young boy took a fighting stance while he stood with an injured kid behind him. Oh, so Deku's getting a bit brave, eh? A boy with explosively pointed hair said while his cronies followed up and walked to his side. Don't hurt other people, Kaken, the forest-haired boy stated. Try me. With a faux smile and a punch to his own palm, the explosive teen created a cackle of a small explosion with his punch. Needless to say, the young boy and the kid he was defending got beaten to a pulp. Izuku Midoriya learned at a young age that not all men are created equal. All of his friends and peers had amazing and useful quirks that could help them in daily life, or when they pursue a job. Of course, being the lucky person he is, Izuku has no quirk. He and his mother once went to the doctor to check if he did have a quirk. Unfortunately, the news wasn't anything good. I'm sorry, but these tests all say that he should have manifested his quirk already. I mean, look at this, he clearly has lost the toe joint, signifying that he's within the criteria of people having quirks. A stereotypical doctor stated while he pointed to X-rays of Izuku's foot. Why you think he won't have a quirk? A young woman with dark forest green hair asked while she looked back at her son. The boy had tears in the corner of his eyes while he held back the urge to let them flow. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that you probably shouldn't get your hopes up. And there it was, Izuku let the tears flow full force before his mother inched her way to the boy while she gripped onto him. SSHHH. It's okay, Izuku, you'll get a quirk, she stated while rubbing his back in comfort. Really? He asked in between sobs. The woman just nodded in response while he kept on sobbing. And I'll be a hero, he asked once more. The doctor watched the whole scene before him in slight sadness. It was probably the hardest part of his job. Being a modern-day pediatrician, he had watched children come and go, having some quirks, and the unlucky ones left in the dirt. But more than 80% of kids nowadays had quirks, but Izuku was probably one of the unlucky ones. I'm sorry for interrupting, but what are you and your husband's quirks? The doctor chimed in. Oh, I can attract small objects towards me, while my husband had flame breath, she stated while she pulled a small All Might figurine from Izuku's hand. I see, the doctor rubbed his beard in thought. It might seem far-fetched, but there have been cases of offspring having quirks unrelated to their parents. The man in a lab coat stated. Though, I wouldn't count on it, we're talking about a 1% chance that this could happen. So there's still a chance? Izuku asked with wide eyes. No, listen to me, kid. It's a small chance, but having a percentage like that, then it might as well be zero. The doctor replied back. The mother and son duo went back home as Izuku looked like a shell of a child. His dreams were crushed thoroughly and his mother watched him break right in front of her. What was she supposed to do? Ko can give Izuku anything, but a quirk is a whole different subject. Izuku walked upstairs and booted up his computer. He clicked and watched his favorite video. A video that picked him up through tough times, a video that gave him hope and inspired him to be better, a video that mocks him that he'll never become a hero. Ko watched him, her own child, cry in hopeless sorrow while she couldn't do anything about it. She walked slowly and crouched a little bit so she could see her child. Mom, Izuku mused, turning back to his mother with tears leaking from the corner of his eyes. See, can I become a hero? He asked, pointing out the video of All Might saving dozens with a large smile plaster on his face. I am here. Oh, Izuku, his mother hugged him once more, this time her own tears leaks as well. Izuku felt empty, his hopes are gone, his heart broken, and his dreams crushed. What else could he lose? The next day, his quirklessness caught on to the school like wildfire. His best friend started to turn on him, Katsuki Bakugo, armed with an explosion quirk that allowed him to detonate his sweat on his palms like a grenade. The whole class turned on him, mocking him so he knows that he's useless. Speaking of which, Katsuki has created a new name for the young boy. Deku. Aka. Useless. It hurt the longer it festered inside him. The years went by as Izuku didn't change. His dreams might be crushed, but the boy still wanted to become a hero one way or another. 6th grade rolled by as the 15-year-old Izuku is still tormented by his peers. The day rolled by as usual while a few insults were thrown his way before the class started. Good morning, everyone, the teacher boredly said while the class replied. Good morning, sensei. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your future. The man with the brown suit and blonde hair stated in front of the class. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but there was a slight pause in his speech while he held the stack of papers. But you're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? With a toss of the papers, the class displayed their quirks for the whole world to see. Cheers and hoorays were pressed while Izuku slumped down to his arms, shame engulfing him while the class showed their quirks off. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher exclaimed. But using your powers at school is against the rules. Teach, don't lump us all in the same group. I'm not going to be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects, Katsuki said with a smug tone. Boos and protest caps you'll be heard from the rest of the class before he retaliated. You should all shut up like the extras you are. Oh, if I remember correctly, you want to go to UA. Hi, right, Bakugo. The teacher asked while looking at a clip note. UA, that national school. Pretty much the whole class asked at the same time. It was in the top 0.2% this year, you know. Their acceptance rate is really low too, you know. The gossip continued before Katsuki butted in again. That's exactly why you guys are just extras. I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. I'll definitely surpass All Might and become the top hero. My name will be inscribed on the list of top earners. With a fist pumped to the sky and a proud tone, Katsuki taunted the whole class. Oh yeah, Midoriya wanted to go to UA. Too, right. The teacher boredly explained. The class died down. Katsuki looked like he froze for a minute before any sound or noise ticked. Izuku deflated once the attention rang around and headed towards him. He cringed when the bellowing laughter of the class boomed. Midoriya, going to UA. That's impossible. A quirkless kid going to UA. Now that's a good one. Deku. With an explosion to his desk, Katsuki sent him skidding to the back of the room. Your quirkless ass trying to compete with me, eh? He asked, smoke smoldering from his palm. And no Kaken. I am not even going to enter the H-Hero course, Izuku replied. He knew he had no chance at the hero course. But going to UA was a life goal he had set for himself. Though he may not be able to enter the hero course, he settled for the general education course instead. Good, but you shouldn't even be thinking of entering UA, 'cause if you do, I'm gonna kill your ass, he replied. Bakugo, calm down. Class is about to start, and I don't want to drag you to the principal's office for a second time this week. The spineless teacher called out. Katsuki gave Izuku one last glare before he turned back to his seat. Break. The day went by as usual. Insults flew, mocks were sent, and the teacher was oblivious to all of this, but Izuku would label this as a normal day. Unfortunately for the boy, normal was becoming a tiring subject. Exhausted every day emotionally and physically from running away from Katsuki, and dealing with all the negativity that he faces was proving to be a harder task to deal with every day. And it's not getting any easier. His old childhood friend Katsuki especially, since the announcement of his quirklessness, the young blonde started to become more aggressive and irritable towards the boy, going as far as using his own quirk on the boy for no particular reason. And it's only gotten worse since then. Soon after, Katsuki's cronies have started to participate in using their quirks against Izuku as well. You'd think that after a few years, Izuku's predicament would be swept under the rug. But Katsuki tells otherwise. Every day he would remind the boy on how useless he is, how worthless he is, and what a waste of space he is. It was repetitive and painful, but even though it may be repetitive, the venom drenched in his words and actions has not sullied down. Writing down on his hero analysis notebook, Izuku ignored all the gossip and talk about his weirdness. It was a nice hobby for him. It distracted him from the horrendous reality that he lived in. It was fruitful as well. He watched a quick fight between a villain with a gigantification-type quirk against a few heroes. It was entertaining, but a few people watched in slight horror with the power the villain possessed. If only he didn't use his quirk to steal purses. Oi Deku, bursting the small bubble of thought Izuku had while he wrote down on his little notebook, Katsuki called, followed by his two cronies. He took the notebook that Izuku was writing in, looking at the label on the front reading Hero Analysis for the Future 13, he sneered, while his lackeys gave a few giggles. The fuck is this shit, Deku? Katsuki asked. Hero Analysis. You fucking creepin' on the heroes again. Deku, Katsuki said with grimly cheery tone. Izuku stuttered to a no Kaken, trying to take back his notebook proved to be quite the task. Katsuki moved it away from arm's reach whenever the green-haired boy tried taking it. Gee, give it back, Kaken, he said. Look, fuckhead. I'm just gonna give you a friendly reminder, alright, Katsuki said with an explosion to his palms, smoldering the notebook in his hand. He tossed the notebook out the open window in the classroom. He put his hand on Izuku's shoulder and he talked in a grimly cheery tone. Don't even think about going to UA. Yeah, Katsuki said, his palm on Izuku's shoulder sizzling up with heat as the boy flinched. The boy blurted out, why yeah. Kaken. Good boy, Katsuki said before he took off his hand, showing the slightly charred garment that Izuku was wearing. Oh, and there still might be hope for you, Katsuki stated with the same grim and cheery tone. You can still get a quirk, he said. Really? Izuku asked with a false tone of hope. Yeah, swan dive off the roof and hope you get a quirk in your next life. With a bellow of laughter and mockery, Katsuki went out and slammed the door behind him while his lackeys followed. Izuku ran to the window when Katsuki left. He looked down to his notebook on a pond below, the koi nibbling on the pages, while the charred pages were soaked. The boy gave a long sigh, his feet dragging him to go to his only place for solitude. The roof. He dragged himself upstairs while he let the wind blow its cold air against his face. The day was beautiful. Too bad the same can't be said for what he experienced during that day. A tear flowed down his eye when he went up to the railings and watched the people walk down below him. It gave him a nostalgic feeling, a feeling he wasn't too keen on. Everyone looked so happy and content with themselves, unknowing to the depressing misery above them, watching their every step. It wasn't a surprise that Katsuki's words hit Izuku hard. It would always give him a nasty taste in his mouth whenever he would talk to the other boy. Nothing could sugarcoat the sheer amount of bad scenes playing in his life. First his quirklessness, then losing his best friend. His best friend turning on him while his other classmates soon followed. Watching his mother hopelessly accept the fact that he's broken. Watching the teachers give him little to no attention about the bullying problem. adults looking at him with pity, and finally, the soul emptiness that resides within him when he learned that he couldn't become a hero. Break. Izuku walked back towards the other side of the roof. He looked down to see the back of the school occupied by absolutely no one. Taking one last glance at the ground below him, he saw grass, trees, concrete blocks, metal sims for the sub-buildings, and pipes, construction materials for the school. It wasn't surprising that the school had those materials, but it did surprise him that they didn't keep it in a shed or another building. Walking back, he took a long and heavy breath before he steeled his mind. Nothing can help him now, and he can't take it anymore. The lump in his heart was just too painful for him to stand. The deep burning sorrow in his stomach was tearing him apart. "Goodbye, Mom, I'm sorry if I was a burden. Take care," he muttered before he broke into a sprint. And then, he jumped. He jumped off the railing on the roof. Unfortunately for him, his unathletic stature made his leg catch on the railing. He flopped down and fell down ungracefully. He crashed. With a loud thud and a clang of metal, a portion of the wall in the back of the school was painted in red. Blood decorated the walls and parts of the grass and the construction materials. Again, unfortunately for Izuku. Due to his trajectory, he hit the metal sims beneath him, neck first. With one swift and clean cut, he was headless. The blood spurting from his neck while the lifeless eyes from his head shut still. Then everything was white. Pain, static, light, darkness, hate, frost. All these feelings and visions flowing through his body at once while the searing pain flowing through cut him like a heated sword through ice. It hurt like nothing can top this level of physical pain. Especially on the neck and head, his headache was equivalent to putting him in between a vice. The white in his vision faded down, the static meshing back into comprehensible noise. The pain still there while the boy gave a pain groan. "Everything hurts," he muttered. Slowly opening his eyes, he saw the white light simmer down into reds, greens, beiges, and blues. The white noise in his ears went back from static to the usual birds chirping and the winds blowing in the normal school day. The lump in his chest returned, the aching feeling, the unimaginable emotional pain festering inside returned full force as he realized what had just happened. "I can't even end it all correctly. Is this some kind of sick joke? Does the world really hate me enough to keep me here?" he asked, tears flowing from his eyes while he grit his teeth in frustration. Why? With a shout of pure fury he let the last tear shed. It wasn't anything new for the boy to cry after a day in hell, but he just did something to try and escape. But he failed. "Damn it," he sniffled. "How am I gonna explain this to Mom?" He tried getting up, but his vision was still sideways on a nearby bush. "And my bones are probably broken," mumbling while trying to scratch his head. But when he tried, no hand came up to his head. He instead felt the branches and leaves of a bush, or maybe a tree perhaps. Ugh. What happened? A rhetorical question he asked himself while trying to move. While he did so, he noticed the bush in front of him rustling as well. "Is someone there?" he called out while trying to inch away from the bush. Unfortunately, his vision told him that he hasn't moved an inch from where he was. "Hey. Don't come any closer," he winced once the bushes started shaking more violently. Stop," he shouted, until he saw it. A headless body crawling backwards while blood stained its neck in black uniform. Izuku yelled. A G-ghost. Trying to run away, the boy's face flopped to the ground as he tried to turn. He saw the body run around and around as he kept screaming for help. For some reason, the boy was starting to get winded. Someone, Izuku almost whispered while panting, looking to the headless body. He saw that it was also mimicking a motion like it was wheezing. He tried scratching his head in confusion, but what he saw shocked him. Izuku saw the headless body perk up and attempt to scratch its head, if only it had one. Putting the puzzle pieces together, Izuku muttered, that am my body?" he asked in terror. Moving back and forwards, Izuku noted that his body followed suit. How?" he asked, scratching his arm and brushing the dirt off his uniform. He looked back at his bloodied body in interest. But what was most intriguing was the fact that his injuries were slowly healing. The dislocated and slightly beaten up ankle he had was slowly moving back to its original position. His scratches and bruises were slowly healing up as well. After a few minutes of observing while he commanded his body, he took note at the searing pain slowly dissipate as well. Weird trying to get the right position and move correctly, he instructed his detached body to pick his decapitated head up. It was easier said than done. He watched his own body crash into walls, bushes, and the trees nearby. Feeling the pain of bumping full force into these things might not be the best experience, so he tried slowly maneuvering his body into walking back to his head. After a few tries, he finally did it. He picked up his head and tried putting it back up on his neck, but it just slid off once he placed it on. What? He shouted, picking up his head once more from the ground. Looking closely, he noticed how blood was still slightly flowing from his neck. He screamed when the dripping blood formed into string-like materials and tried attaching themselves back to his head. "Gah!" he screamed. He tossed his head in shock before his face crashed into a bush. Looking through the shrubbery, he saw the strings droop down and return into its liquid state. Oh my God, Izuku gasped. He had to write this down on his notebook. He reached into the shrubbery and picked his head back up. He tried once again to put his head back on his neck, but it slid down once again. Damn, he walked back to his head and picked it back up again. What's wrong? Why can't I put it back on? Walking up to the reflective sim, he examined his neck. Still bloodied and cleaved clean. But what was most strange was the fact that the neck, or what was supposed to be his neck, on his head was completely healed, save for the fact that his jugular and windpipe were still cut. Freaky, Izuku muttered while he carried his head between his elbow and the side of his torso. Wait, Izuku said while looking back on his impact position. Blood was still present and was decorating the walls. He panicked. Izuku looked back and forth by using his hands to position his head while he almost squealed in terror. How am I gonna clean this all up? A thought that horrified him while he took a towel from his yellow, now soaked in blood, bag and one hand wiped frantically on the walls. Izuku widened his eyes at what he saw. The crimson liquid that painted the walls and ground formed back into the same string-like material, and zipped its way back to the base of Izuku's neck. Izuku yelped when he felt the ticklish pricks of the stringy material penetrate the remains of his neck. His back and the towel were ridden of their scarlet shade as well. The headache returned, not from what happened or side effects of him literally trying to jump off a building, but processing this information was taking a toll on his brain cells. It was a little bit too much to process. A groan escaped his mouth while he trudged through the school grounds. Luckily for him, all the students have left, due to it being a Friday afternoon. This won't be good, he muttered while he carried his head on his arms. Break. I, Katsuki, wanna hit the arcade. One of his cronies asked while drinking a bit of soda. Yeah, that sounds good, his second lackey added. Hey, fuck off, I ain't in the mood for that shit, Katsuki said while he took the soda his friend was drinking. And taking a moment to compile his sweat on his palms, Katsuki set up a small explosion and threw the charred can behind him like it was nothing. Hey Katsuki, I was still drinking that. His crony with devilishly red wings whined. Making a small cackle in his palms, Katsuki retaliated. The fuck you gonna do about it? Fatty, I'm not fat, I'm just big-boned. Walking up to the alleyway that they usually loiter in, the trio of delinquents heard sloshing noises. Looking around, the three saw nothing. Is a sewer getting backed up or something? His lackey with a finger extending quirk added. Lovely meat shields. A nearby drainage pipe burst as a gloopy villain emerged. What the foo? Katsuki yelled before the slime villain attached himself to the ash blonde boy. The two cronies left the scene faster than the villain flopped himself on the little explosion. Hey, Gurk, fucking don't leave me. Katsuki yelled before the villain cackled horrendously. Haha, it'll just be a few seconds. What a lovely quirk you have. The slime villain said while he looked at Katsuki setting off small explosions on his palms. Break. Walking down the street while carrying your own head on your hands was definitely a weird experience. People gave Izuku disgusted looks, while some delinquents and possible psychos gave him an intrigued glance. He cringed whenever there was a small child pointing at him for their parents to tell them to look away. Then a large boom happened nearby. Izuku moved his head to face the direction of the blast. Interested in a possible hero fight, Izuku broke into a sprint. He ran before he saw an alleyway scorched with fire and multiple heroes fighting off what appeared to be green slime. Hands off him, you villain. A man with yellow and black braces on his fist yelled while he jumped in and punched the slime, only for it to be completely ignored. You can't touch me. I'm a goddamn liquid. The goopy villain bellowed. He used his sling fist to smack the muscular man away. Damn it, I can't get near. The kid keeps setting off explosions. A man with a wooden upper body, arms, and mask said while another hero snuffed out the nearby flames. Explosions. Izuku heard through the screams of terror and shock. Izuku raised his head up using his hands to check on the scene. Damn it, I still can't see anything, he muttered. Izuku shoved his way in front of the crowd before he gasped at what he saw. Katsuki's face and half of his body was consumed by a green and repugnant slime villain. His eyes teary and desperate, his palms bloodied and swollen from overuse of his quirk, and the slime attempting to suffocate him. Without any thought, Izuku broke into a sprint. His body not obeying his mind, Izuku tossed his bag at the slime's eye. Kid, get back. The hero clad in wood known as Kamui Woods called. Fucking kid, you got a death wish or something? The gooey villain asked while Izuku ran and started scraping the slime off Katsuki's body with one hand while the other was holding his head. I am sorry, Kaken. I should have come sooner. It's just that your eyes told me that why you really needed help. Izuku stated with teary eyes while he scratched and scraped away the slime with desperation. Cocking back his slimy fist, the villain shouted, "Fuck off, kid, and take your head with you." He slammed his gelatinous fist down on Izuku's body. But instead of Izuku crashing into a wall, Izuku's body skidded a few meters behind before he ran back to his original position and scraped once more. Kaken. Izuku yelled with the ash blonde began setting off explosions towards himself to try and pry the villain off. Kid, get back here. Backdraft, a rescue specialist hero, used his water quirk to pull Izuku back to the crowd. Damn it, kid, don't make my job any harder. With a mental tug, Backdraft reeled Izuku in using his water arms. I've gotta help Kaken. While his body was being pulled, Izuku arched his arms backward while he gripped onto his own head. And he tossed. The crowd behind him, the heroes around him, the slime villain, Kaken, and even himself were surprised at the action. The crowd gasped, the heroes face-palmed, the villain cackled, and Katsuki went wide-eyed when he saw the head flying its way to the villain. Suicidal bastard. Reeling his numerous slimy appendages back, the villain lashed out multiple slimy and liquid tendrils. The tendrils hit multiple trash cans and the walls, but they missed. Izuku's head is still flying. Takes this. Izuku yelled while he saw the small pink membrane in what appeared to be the slime's head. Izuku penetrated the mucus of his head while he traveled through the slime's goop. Chump. He took a big bite out of whatever pink organ was floating in the villain's head before the slime became more like water, the sticky substance becoming more dilute as his shape slowly poured like water. The pupils in his eyes reeled to the back of his head while he released Katsuki of his goopy prison. Izuku's head crashed onto some trash and behind Katsuki as he spat out whatever he just bit. Both Izuku and Katsuki coughed while Izuku took a double take and took a glance at what he just took a bite in. He widened his eyes, bottom lip trembling in fear once he learned what he just did. He bit the brain. He felt his gag reflex kick in. He tried throwing up, only for him to look back at his body throwing up chunks at the base of the neck on a nearby tree back with the crowd. He killed someone. A sick feeling in his gut emerged when the heroes picked his head up and gave it back to his body. They scolded him, but he wasn't listening. He was more focused on the fact that he had just killed someone, his cornea becoming pure white while the heroes kept scolding him. Izuku took a few glances at Katsuki while the nurses from the ambulance that came by checked up on him. Katsuki gave him a glare, an intrigued look, and a look of mortification. Mixed feelings towards the boy had become apparent while a flurry of emotions could be seen from the ash blonde. Izuku got to go home first since he had way less injuries compared to Katsuki. Well, the paramedics still insisted for him to get his bloody neck treated. Izuku walked back home, a lump still in his chest while he trudged. Break. While he walked down the block leading towards his house, he heard someone call out to him. Hey Deku. Turning with his head in one of his hands, Izuku looked towards Katsuki, fuming. Don't fucking think that I owe you jack shit. The ash blonde screamed at the top of his lungs while he pointed at the boy. And no, it's fine. Take Haken, he said with a weak smile. And what the fuck is with that head of yours? Lowering his finger to point at Izuku's head, Katsuki asked. You got some secret quirk or some shit? I don't even know myself, Izuku muttered back before turning his back on Katsuki and walking home. You think that you're too good for me, eh? Hiding your quirk and shit. He added. Don't fucking think that this'll change anything. Katsuki yelled before Izuku was out of earshot. Break. Mom, I'm home. Izuku called once he closed the gate behind him. He held his head on his hands while the door opened. Welcome home, Izuku. Widening her eyes, Inko looked at the boy literally holding his head in his hands before she fell over. Mom. Mom. Izuku ran over before he shook her with one hand. Inko had fainted from shock. Izuku Midoriya has been ready for many things during her life. Finding a lover, preparing herself for motherhood, and raising a child. Though, what she wasn't ready for was seeing her child beheaded and carrying his own head like second-hand luggage. Of course, like the good and kind mother that she was, her initial reaction was shock. Then of course, that shock quickly grew more and more until she fainted in said shock. Too bad as well, since Izuku was also in shock at seeing Inko fall over. The boy jostled before he rushed over to his own mother and checked her vitals. Good, she's still breathing, Izuku muttered to himself when he felt her breath on her nose and mouth. He put his head on the floor next to his mother before, with all his might, carried her over to the couch in their living room. Now that took more time than it normally would, since Izuku still wasn't used to his new perspective of things, or rather the new perspective he put himself into. Of course it would still need some getting used to. Looking at your own headless body walk around and do as you command is certainly a strange feeling. Izuku, or rather, his body went back to his head around the door frame and picked it back up. Izuku had a lot to think of after what happened. First off, he had a quirk now. And second, said quirk did not allow him to die whatsoever. He went up to his room after he placed his red sneakers by the main door and sat down on his computer chair. He struggled to find a spot where to place his head since his desk was so cluttered with notes and books, not to mention hero paraphernalia. He gave in and just placed his head on his lap, positioning it ever so slightly so that his eyes could see his computer screen. Typing on said computer was another matter he found problems in. Not only did he have many typos when he searched in the search engine, but he misclicked many times as well. After a few excruciating minutes of trial and error, Izuku was finally able to manage to look up Immortality quirk. Izuku scowled slightly in confusion when little to no results came up. He had thought that at least one other person in the 7 billion humans to walk this earth had the same problem as he did. But alas, Izuku clicked on multiple links and websites, but the results were always about either cult, superstition, a villain with the ability to steal other quirks, gods, fairy tales, or those shady websites that open up multiple pages in attempts to download a virus. Izuku sighed and scratched his head, attempted to scratch above his neck before he corrected himself and scratched the head on his lap. Yep, I'm probably the only guy in this world with this type of problem, he thought to himself with a sarcastically cheery tone. Inko woke up, not feeling well she might add. She had this horrific dream where she saw her son headless and bringing his head like a carrying case. When she got up from the couch by swinging her legs by, she groaned and rubbed her eyes for a moment before she saw Izuku's red sneakers by the side of the door frame. She smiled widely as she was thankful that it was just some sick nightmare. "Izuku," she called out from the bottom of the stairs. "Dinner will be ready in a bit," she stated. "All right, Mom." She smiled when she confirmed that her son was upstairs and probably doing his homework or what other kids do nowadays. She felt grateful for a bit, knowing that her son was still alive and had his head and all. She quickly went to the kitchen and fished out frozen fish and many other ingredients for dinner. She had been a single mother for several years, so she definitely knows how to cook by now. On the other hand, Izuku was still struggling with looking up quirks with similar nature. Searching immunity quirk was also a dead deal, since most just brought up people who were immune to poison and whatnot. It was mind-boggling to the boy to think that in the entire world, no one had anything remotely similar to what he had. Was he one of a kind? Was he special? Did he possibly have a new kind of quirk? And if so, does that mean Izuku will get registered as a new form or category of quirks? Oh right, Izuku thought to himself. I still need to get myself registered. He heard his mother call out to him for dinner as he huffed a tired sigh. He knows the minute she sees him headless and bringing his head like a football would elicit stress once more, but what could the boy do? It's not like he could just tape his head on. No, he only had masking tape in his room. And that kind of tape would be flimsier than a house of cards. "Izuku dear, dinner's ready," he hears his mother call once again. But this time, instead of just thinking about going downstairs and hide his newfound quirk, he'd actually go downstairs and try and explain himself. After a bit of practicing and making sure he doesn't bump into anything, Izuku carefully walked down the stairs while carrying his own head around his left arm and waist. He shuffled carefully while making sure his footing isn't off while he traverses the steps of the stairs. "Hello Izuku. How was school?" After laying her eye on Izuku once more, Inko dropped the utensils she was holding to fall over and faint once more. "Mom." Izuku rushed over and with one arm, laid her on the couch once again. "I knew this would probably happen," Izuku thought with a sigh. "Hopefully people don't get sick from fainting too much." Izuku sighed once more. This won't be easy to explain, he thought to himself. Truth be told, after a few minutes of waiting while he took a few glances back at the dinner table filled with seafood dishes, his mother began waking up again. Izuku was dreading the reaction his mother was going to give. It was either going to be shock with grief and large amounts of crying, shock and large amounts of crying, or denial with large amounts of crying. Either way, there was no going away from the crying. Inko slowly opened her eyes while she rubbed her temples. She didn't know why, but she had a splitting headache. Inko winced when she got up from the couch as she took in her environments. Of course, she was still on the couch in their living room, but she felt that something was definitely off. "Izuku dear," she called out to be greeted with Izuku's voice. There was a short pause before the boy could muster up his response. Mom, I think you should calm yourself down first," he spoke. The woman mentioned took a slight curious look on her face before asking back. "What's wrong, Izuku?" A slight frightful and worried tone took her voice. There was another strained pause in between breaths for the boy, especially so since he knows what reaction his mother could give. "Mom, before you say anything, please don't faint," Izuku said in a wary tone. "All right, dear." Inko's voice was trembling while she gripped onto the cushiony base of the sofa. There was yet another long pause before Izuku emerged from underneath the kitchen counter. Headless and carrying his own head in between his arms, Izuku walked up awkwardly, shuffling like he just committed a horrendous sin. "Oh my!" Inko yelled while she rushed up from the couch and almost tripped her way to tackle Izuku with a hug. What happened to my dear baby Izuku?" she desperately asked with tears in her eyes. Izuku, on the other hand, shuffled awkwardly under her embrace while he carried his head by gripping onto his hair. Unfortunately, due to Inko's reaction, Izuku was left to grip onto his hair to avoid dropping his head on the wooden floor. An experience he doesn't want to feel. Mom," Izuku said with shaky words. I think it's my quirk," he stated, as Inko took a moment and released her grip from Izuku to look at him straight in the eye. Well, she had to look down since he was carrying his head on his arms. "Why your quirk?" Inko asked with tear-stained eyes. But how could a quirk do something like this? I mean, look at you. You're headless," the woman with dark green hair exclaimed. Izuku pursed his lips. He doesn't actually know anything about his quirk, let alone why he couldn't die from jumping off a 4-story building. Oh, he mentally stated to himself while looking at his teary-eyed mother. Might not tell her that last bit. I think we should go to a professional," Izuku said awkwardly. His mother nodded solemnly. As much as she wanted to drag him there right this very moment, it was late, and the nearest hospital was an hour away on train. Her motherly instinct screamed to run off with him towards the hospital and find the most certified quirkologist so she could see her beautiful baby boy with a head again. But the deep part inside her that wanted to trust the boy, pleading that he take a rest and do it tomorrow. What was the mother supposed to do? Both solutions seemed to have positives and negatives, but she couldn't make up her mind on whether to rush him to a hospital or not. Then again, she had a splitting headache after seeing her son carrying his own head in his arms. It was honestly the most appalling thing the mother had seen in her life. But that wasn't the weirdest thing, wasn't it? What was strange was the fact Izuku could literally take his head off and parade around while carrying it in his arms. How he does this is way beyond her. What she's more worried about is how this quirk is going to affect his life. Mom, I think we should get me a checkup tomorrow," the son exclaimed while repositioning his head by his side. "Oh, of course, dear. No matter what, we'll go to the hospital and get this fixed," Inko said while gesturing to the head Izuku was holding. "But first, dinner is waiting for us." Izuku let out a sheepish giggle after a moment of awkward silence. It was like they were talking for 30 minutes before they actually took a bite out of the seafood on the table. Looking at it now, Izuku has found another problem with his quirk. How am I supposed to eat? The boy thought to himself with worried emotions while he set his head on the side of the table. He took a glance back at the steaming fish and rice on the bowl while his mother also took a worried glance back at the boy. The boy took a moment before thinking up a plan for consuming food. Of course, it wouldn't be easy to eat when you're headless. But Izuku had an idea. "Mom?" Izuku asked, to which the woman responded with a worried yes. Izuku took a bit of thinking and breathing before he asked once more, "Do we have duct tape?" Izuku was very open to new experiences, but repositioning and aligning his head so that he could align his windpipe and duct tape his head on was not an experience he was expecting in his life. Truth be told, he didn't know why he hadn't come up with this solution sooner. It was definitely more effective than carrying his head in between his arms. Katsuki was not a happy camper, especially when he found out the dead last quirkless sucker was actually hiding his quirk all along. The mere thought of deceiving someone like Katsuki was an infuriating thought. Especially so when the snot-nosed nerd managed to save him when he had one foot in the grave. But something was off with Izuku's quirk. Being able to take off someone's head was a strange quirk to say the least. Being able to fight with it and actually being effective with it is another thing. Watching Izuku, or Deku as he likes to call him, fight a slime monster that even he couldn't take on was frustrating. How could a quirk that takes off heads make him so strong? The worst part is that the very next day, people at his school are talking about how both Katsuki and Izuku were messing with villains. News reports and headlines showing the headless boy chucking his head at the villain was a sight to behold. The kids, especially the bullies and geeks at the school, were talking about how Izuku hid such an amazing quirk from them. Unfortunately, Katsuki's already short temper was getting tired of the subject. "Hey, Bakugo, did you get any juicy stuff about Izuku's quirk yesterday?" His crony with a finger extending quirk asked. Katsuki was ticked off. For one, he brought up Izuku again. And two, he left him for dead yesterday and was acting like it never happened. "Funny you should be talking about that," the ash blonde stated in a cold tone. "'Cause judging from yesterday, you thought that I'd be a dead man." A scowl and light flickers of sparks engulfed the boy's hands while facing his lackey. "Yua, and no Bakugo. Aye, it's just that we were so scared and we forgot that you still there." The fat one with wings exclaimed. "Forgot I was there. You fucks were looking at me dead in the eye when you ran off." The blonde shouts with fury. But before they could tackle the topic further, the homeroom teacher came in after the bell rang. "All right, class, settle down now," the blonde man in a brown suit exclaimed. He took a gander at the students sitting down. Looking round, he noticed that Bakugo was still there. Midoriya had excused himself from school for the day due to reasons from the event prior, so it was surprising that Katsuki, the one who was actually attacked, was still attending classes for the day. "Oh, Bakugo, be careful next time. Make sure you watch out for villains and don't go near shady alleyways," the teacher suggested while the boy gave an annoyed grunt. Teacher." A shy boy with rocks for hair and hands raised his rocky palm. "Yes, Raku," the teacher responded. "Boo, Midoriya hasn't come up yet. He isn't usually late." What happened yesterday? "I'm asking if he was okay or not," the Rocky student asked. "Oh, don't worry, Raku. Midoriya has been excused due to health concerns. But I've been informed that nothing serious has happened," the man said in a flat but reassuring tone. "But Sensei, Midoriya was literally decapitated," the teen responded while a burst of murmurs and whispers emerged from the classroom. Of course, Bakugo was holding back his rage while he glared daggers at the Rocky boy. "You well," the teacher exclaimed while scratching the back of his head. "Midoriya seems to have gone to a hospital by now. But I would guess that his headlessness is a possible quirk-related feature. I'm not too sure. You can all press him once he comes back." Riding on a train with duct tape on your neck was an awkward affair. People keep staring at you like you're wearing an extra thick choker. The teenagers as well. There were slight whispers about the headless boy from the news reports, and the word Dullahan being thrown a lot with the other passengers. Luckily for Izuku, the train wasn't as packed since the morning rush of students was finished. Inko could feel that Izuku was uncomfortable. It was apparent when he would thumble with the tape on his neck every 5 seconds and look around to see if anyone was looking. But the mother of one couldn't really do anything. She couldn't stop the judging stares people give, and she couldn't certainly stop the media from talking about the green-haired headless student with the death wish that was one nickname. She was far too excited to be lynched. Her initial reaction towards Izuku mingling with the dangerous criminal was obviously worry and fear. But after Izuku had explained himself, that feeling was still worry and fear, just on a slightly lower level. Walking to the hospital, Inko could still see a few people pointing at Izuku and commenting about his neck, or rather the silver duct tape that was covering a good half of his neck. Assistance from the main counter was relatively stress-free and calm. The quirkologist that Inko had asked for was there in a jiffy and was quite quick with the introductions and prerequisites. All right, first off, I'd like you to explain how exactly you managed to discover you quirk, the man with large glasses and a white beard asked while taking a look at Izuku's wound, or rather, the slit in between his neck. Izuku was dry-mouthed, not because of the lack of saliva, but because of the fear of confessing his sins to his mother. He couldn't just say straight up that he attempted and almost succeeded in suicide. He took a moment to think about it while the two other people in the room looked at him patiently awaiting for an answer. It was an accident. I kinda tripped on the roof at school, Izuku exclaimed. His throat was tightening up, his sweat glands going crazy as he took awkward glances back to home mother and the actual doctor. The man shrugged while he took down notes. His mother on the other hand said a worried and shocked my Izuku. What kind of mother am I letting my child get decapitated? She said with a gasp. The doctor hummed and thought, all right Midoriya, we'll be executing We'll be executing some tests. I hope you'll be cooperating with us so that we could just find out what kind of quirk lets the user be decapitated, he stated. Various painful, repetitive, and dull tests were tried on the boy, especially with syringes and knives. Although it only took a few seconds before the blood samples the doctor took either skidded its way back to the base of Izuku's neck, or broke its way out of the test tube and then back to Izuku's neck. Enko had never seen such a brutal way to test someone's quirk. Taking a knife and slicing a bit of Izuku's skin was definitely a sight she never ever wants to see again. Inserting needles, slicing skin, scraping flesh and wiping off blood was something she was way too squeamish about, especially since it was her son that she was watching. Unluckily for Izuku, he had to feel all those things, and the healing was no better. He could feel the needly pricks of his blood stringing together and piercing his skin as he healed. Alrighty then, Midoriya, the doctor stated while wiping sweat off his brow and tossing the latex gloves in the bin. I've seen strange quirks in my 9 years of being a quirkologist, and I have got to say that this quirk of yours has got to be the strangest yet, he said while looking to his clipboard with notes written down. So, what is his quirk? Is being headless his actual quirk? Inko asked pleadingly. I'm glad you asked, the doctor said with a proud smirk. So far, I have observed 3 major factors regarding your quirk, Midoriya, he stated. First off, your red blood cell seems to show this phenomenon where it portrays this sort of pseudo-sentience, wherein it always flows no matter what, and without the assistance of the heart. Also, it seems that it always goes back to its host. Observed by the blood samples jumping out from the syringe and back to your neck, Midoriya, the doctor said. So what are you saying? And my heart doesn't affect my blood flow or anything? Midoriya asked. Well, yes and no, the man said while scratching his head in thought. Well, your blood flows regardless of heart interference and acts like a deterrent for threats in your body. Shown here by your perfect health record in this hospital, the doctor asked Izuku about his health and whether he has been sick in the past before, to which he responds no and proved his theory correct. And this brings me to the second thing, the older man stated while flipping to the next page of his clipboard. It seems that your heart is completely missing due to the almost sentient red blood cells. Rather than a pulsing beating heart, you just have an empty cavity in between your lungs. That's impossible. Izuku had been x-rayed when he was born. Inko denied. Yes, but quirks manifested around age 4. Till then, the body adapts and depending on the quirk, the body changes and sometimes organs are lost or added. It's not an uncommon thing. But completely losing one's pulmonary organ definitely is, the man said with a chuckle. Izuku put his hand on his chest, and truth be told he felt no beats. He looked wide-eyed at the doctor before the man smiled warmly back at him. Midoriya, have you observed that you don't have a pulse either? The doctor asked. Izuku shook his head slowly in response. Yes. It is quite strange actually. Your blood flows, but due to the lack of artery muscles, your blood flows smoothly and thus, you have no pulse whatsoever. Izuku thought to himself on how dead he actually was. And now the third thing, and arguably the strangest and most peculiar aspect about your quirk. The doctor took a huff of breath before flipping his clipboard to the next page. It seems that you, and I quote, are immortal. Both Midoriya's gasped in shock as the doctor shrugged and gave them an equally confused look. Izuku already knew that he had an immortality quirk in one way or another, but it was just as shocking to have a trained professional verify it. Immortality, as in, not dying. As in, 1,000-year-old and still walking the earth. Both of the Midoriyas looked back at each other before they asked for more details. Well, we doctors have discovered a new way of judging a person's age by both skin graph and an infrared laser that 3D maps your skin and automatically verifies your age. And well, your skin depicts that you have not aged a single day since you were born. Well, that might not be completely true, but it is true that since the age of 4, your skin has stopped showing any signs of age. Though, I fail to see how that could correlate to how you would not die from being decapitated. The man exclaimed. It was still extremely hard to grasp Izuku's quirk. For 1, his blood is alive for some reason. 2, he had no heart and pulse. And finally 3, the boy could not die and has some sort of youth quirk. Izuku was still bewildered at the fact that he had a quirk, let alone a quirk that denied him of death. Inko, at the other hand, was worried about the boy. She had seen far too many fantasy movies where the immortal wise one says how immortality is a curse and her child being unkillable was definitely a mixed bag of emotions. On one hand, she didn't need to fear Izuku's death. On the other hand, she fears about the happiness the boy will lack when all his friends and family are gone while he lives on. This quirk of yours. It could save a lot of lives if given the right doctors and professionals to test on it. Midoriya, what I am about to ask you is completely your decision, the man said while taking off his glasses, and took a more serious tone. Are you willing to donate your body for the future of medicine and the possible discovery of eternal youth? The man asked. What? No, of course not. Absolutely not. I will not have my child be experimented on and become a lab rat. Enko responded angrily. She knows that people would do this. She knows, and oh how quickly did it pop up. The doctor let out a sigh before he pinched the bridge of his nose. He took one last look between the angry mother and gobsmacked boy that was Izuku. After a few minutes of suffocating silence, the man spoke once more. Midoriya, I am willing to redact some information on your quirk, as long as you keep your mouth shut and don't squawk any info about your immortality. I suggest you pick a name so you get registered, he stated. There are people willing to kill for a quirk like this, Midoriya, and I hope you understand. Alright, the boy spoke in a low tone. He thought about what kind of name his quirk should be. It was definitely not an easy task to say the least, especially since they were talking about an immortality quirk. He pondered on it for a bit. Eternal. No. Everlasting. No. Eternum. Nah. Perpetua. That sounds a bit religious. He thought for a bit while scratching his head on his lap while the doctor and his mother looked at him in anticipation. Deathless. Unkillable. Wait, I think I should make the name subtle, the boy thought. His eyes were darting across the room in desperation of a quirk name. He looked towards trash bins, weighing scales, and boxes of cotton, until he looked at a rubber band sitting at the desk of his quirkologist. The rubber band was nestled in an 8 form, a sideways 8 to be precise. Izuku tilted his head at looking at such a thing, until it struck him. Of course, infinite, he thought with a detached smile. Oh, I think I came up with a name, Izuku stated with a shaky smile at the doctors. Oh, then by all means, tell us, he replied. Izuku took one last confident smile before saying. Mugen with a determined look, he glanced at the doctor's raised eyebrow. Infinite. Strange, but quite fitting actually. All right, thank you for your cooperation. The man with the white beard replied. Who, doctor? Inko asked with a raised hand, to which the doctor replied with yes. Is Izuku going to be permanently beheaded? Inko asked. Well, I might have a solution for that, with an awkward smile. The doctor was now holding a large needle and some surgical string. Izuku did not like the next part. And in other news, several quirkologists and pediatricians have been reported missing around the Kyoto Prefecture, Hasu City, and Musutafu Ward. The police are frantically searching for the suspects, but Izuku turned the television off while he lazed around on the couch. He was scratching his neck where the stitches had been applied while his mother was in the kitchen. He tugged unconsciously on one snippet of surgical string while his mother cooked them dinner. Izuku dear, I don't think you should be picking at it. It's only been a few hours and I'm not quite sure you would like to get it restitched, she scolded from across the counter as the boy cringed. Having his head sewed back onto his neck was not an experience he was excited to relive. In fact, the boy was borderline traumatized from the happening. All right, Izuku replied weakly. It wasn't that the string keeping his head on was irritating or anything. It was just that his neck felt extremely stiff. For one, it didn't have the same feeling that it had when he was quirkless, but it was just one of the few gripes he now had. Other than that, it felt prickly. The base of his neck and the bottom half of his head felt like they were both being lightly electrocuted. When he asked the doctor about it though, the man merely replied with, it's because of your sentient blood. My child, it flows without any need of a pulmonary organ, so it would naturally move around even if something is on it. Izuku was starting to miss carrying his own head if it meant relieving him of this nuisance. He could barely turn his neck around before he could feel the pain of the thin strings tugging at his flesh. It was not a pleasant experience. Izuku couldn't get much sleep that night. He could feel the prickly movements of the tiny cells within his blood slosh around his neck area. It didn't help much that whenever he turned there was a pang of pain in his neck. It bugged him for the most part, but seeing his mother slightly calm down after the whole headless fiasco was worth it. Izuku was nervous. Not only did he have to go back to school, which was the main reason on why he found his quirk out, but he knew that he was definitely going to be bombarded with questions. He was the headline when he saved Katsuki from the sludge villain. He saw his black and green hair fly across the screen and his body stumble across the sidewalk while onlookers pointed in shock and terror. And Izuku had all the reasons to be scared. Well, he thinks it would be an utter disaster when he comes back to school. But he can't help but be optimistic. He had a quirk, for crying out loud, a quirk. He was one of the 80% of lucky people to receive a special power or property, though some stronger than others. Izuku was already late, and he saw small sparks of explosions when he crossed the gate. The boy took a big gulp of saliva as he trudged down the hall. He definitely had enough pains on his neck to realize that going to school right after an operation with a fresh wound probably wasn't the best idea. He knocked on the door 3 times, gripping onto the straps of the bright yellow bag. He took in one last deep breath before sliding open the door to meet the class all perk up and stare at his direction. Oh God, Izuku thought to himself while he took a scratch at the stitchings on his neck. "Ah, good morning, Midoriya. Hope you're feeling well today. Please take your seat," the teacher instructed once he entered. Izuku could feel the judgmental gazes his classmates gave him. It really made him squirm. He took his seat and put his yellow bag by his desk. But for some reason, Izuku felt different. He could feel the malicious aura Katsuki was enveloping him in. Izuku took a glance back and saw the boy glaring daggers at him. It was kinda expected, since he knew that Katsuki was pissed that he helped him out during the whole slime fiasco. But what Izuku didn't expect was that some of his classmates actually warming up to him. "Hey Izuku, your quirk's pretty cool," a classmate whispered to Izuku before he gave him a fake smile. He wasn't really that ready for praise, especially when they were praising his quirk. Izuku didn't feel quite happy though. It was because of his classmates and peers that Izuku found his quirk out. It was terribly unfortunate on how he discovered his quirk. But Izuku pressed on with a weak and fake smile as a reply. The boy found that his classmates only treated him nicely the moment they found out about his quirk. Well, if you consider one part of your quirk as the truth, then they really are just judgmental people. Izuku has seen this type of person so many times before during the span of his elementary days. But why does a lack of a quirk mean the lack of humanity? It was almost as if he was useless without it. A small part of him deep down agreed. It was painful, yes, but Izuku can somewhat make sense of what they keep telling him. Izuku sometimes wonders if he was better off gone from this world, if it would make it somewhat of a better place if he was away, if he was just a waste of valuable space. It pained him to think of this, especially since he was surrounded with all these fake people, only acknowledging him when he got his quirk. It irked him at first, but what could he do? Izuku doesn't have any special abilities other than he could not die and have no heart. He didn't have a flashy and cool quirk. Izuku knows that flashier is better, but in a way, he was content with his quirk. Not happy. Content. Soft tears slid down from his eyes as the lecture went on. Izuku wiped ever so often as to not draw any suspicion. He took a few glances back and forth to check if anyone saw him crying. He gave a relieved sigh when he saw no one had noticed. But it did not help that Bakugo was still glaring daggers at him. Izuku took a quick glance at the explosive ash blonde. The scarlet-eyed bomb was visibly pissed, from his body language right down to his face. Izuku winced when the boy set off a small explosion in his palm. Memories of pain sparks engulfed Izuku's thoughts once more. His breathing got hitched, his head was getting hurt once more. It was like being in between a vice. Izuku laid his head on his palms. He tried focusing and keeping calm, but everything was just so much. All that happened to him in just a span of a few days was suffocating. It wasn't helping that Katsuki was just sitting there, menacingly. Izuku's eyes were damp again, his head swirling in a fit of pain. The boy was just about ready to throw up. Until, "Hey, you okay there, Midoriya?" a classmate asked him with a soft smile. Izuku fought the urge to frown. He took a moment to collect himself before responding. "And no, I'm fine," Izuku mumbled just low enough for his classmate to hear it. Said classmate shrugged in response. Typical, Izuku thought to himself. The boy had been meek and timid all his life. But nothing can keep him from thinking his thoughts. Oh, all the times he dreamt of beating Katsuki up with All Might's quirk. Izuku relished those few moments in his mind. Though it may seem morbid at times, but Izuku never minded. He was already mentally unstable the moment he had thoughts about ending himself, so why would this be any different? It was engulfing him. All these mixed emotions he was feeling at the time made him want to hurl. He took a few glances around him once again. Good, no one was paying attention to him. Izuku timidly raised his hand and asked for permission to go to the bathroom, to which the teacher replied with yes. Izuku rushed himself to the bathroom. All the swirls in his head and the cold sweat he felt just got to him. Izuku hurled out his pent-up emotions in the form of vomit in the public school toilet. He quickly wiped off any trace with tissue paper. Izuku walked up towards the mirror after throwing up his breakfast. He looked at himself, he scowled. Look at yourself, pathetic as ever. He angered himself for a moment until he realized that his thoughts were correct. I bet without this quirk, it would be so much easier. He cursed himself. Izuku was not supposed to have these kinds of thoughts. The boy was already blessed with the one thing he had always been dreaming of, a quirk. But why did it feel so underwhelming? Sure, he was denied of death. And that was a pretty astonishing quirk on its own. But what could he ever do on the battlefield? Die and come back a second time, third time, fourth time. Izuku was a distraction at best, yet why did he feel so vulgar at this fact? Like he was in denial when it was in fact true. It sickened him to his core, inner turmoil being the only thing that keeps him up at night. Izuku remembered the day he tried to make up for his sins. He tried wiping himself off the earth so a much more gifted child could replace him. But when Izuku was at his darkest, his quirk had managed to save him. Save him. That wasn't quite right. Izuku doesn't feel saved. Izuku feels condemned to this place. A curse he had rather extinguished as soon as possible. Only a handful of people actually cared for him, and even they themselves look at him with pity. Like every misfortune on this world had accumulated into one person. It was sickening to think of really, but they were right. Izuku is not the type of person to think highly of himself. But he does in fact know that his quirk should be given to someone else. It wasn't that he isn't thankful for a quirk that denied him death, it was more on application. Izuku doesn't feel like he deserves something like this. Izuku doesn't feel like he deserves anything really. He was just empty, both in heart and soul. Taking one last breath and a back glance to the mirror, Izuku walked out the bathroom. Emotional fits like that only occur every so often. Izuku is lucky that everyone just decides to ignore him. All the better so he could disappear easily. But his quirk denied him of that as well. He entered back into the classroom, barely noticed by anyone as he slid in as unsuspectingly as ever. He hopes things would get better, but nothing really does. Izuku can't help but be pessimistic. He knows that it's the only thing he can really do. "Child, what do you have for me today?" An ominous voice emanated through the static of a video screen. "Oh, sensei. There is a child around Musutafu Ward who has a frost breath quirk," the meek man responded while he shuffled the files in his hand haphazardly. "Do not test my patience, boy. Only show me the interesting ones," the voice now known as Sensei spat venomously. "Oh yeah, of course, Sensei." The short and fragile man on the other line fumbled around the papers and records before he picked up a select few. How about a child with an explosion quirk? He was last located around the Kyoto suburban area. "Unnecessary, I can simulate the effect with ease using other quirks," Sensei replied. Oh, but of course." He flipped his folder to the next one and proceeded to find another mildly interesting quirk. A child that can take his head off and has sentient blood. A quick readjustment of his glasses and a slight cough escaped his throat as he spoke. The man has always been nervous whenever he speaks to Sensei. By no means does he have the privilege to commit a mistake. He was the 47th replacement for a reason, so he had to achieve perfection to survive. Sentient blood. Interesting. A slight intrigued voice started to show from the video screen, something he was relieved to hear. Why yes. Unfortunately, the child has little to no documentation and information about his quirk. Everything that I had read was all the data on his file, he replied. The man had gone white. If Sensei was going to be disappointed, then that would cost him his life. "Shame. Do you know who the quirkologist is?" Sensei asked, which relieved the man slightly. But he wasn't off the hook just yet. It's Dr. Nagusaka, he said. The man scratched head for a moment. He keeps personal audio logs of the patient in particular. Strange to say the least, nothing on the file said that the boy had a strange quirk. Well, blood alterations were rare, so that might have sparked Sensei's interest. But what strikes him the most was that the boy barely had any information on his quirk. But the doctor decided it would be fine for him to record it for his personal uses. Nothing really made sense. "Oh, interesting. What is the name of this child?" Sensei questioned. "Izuku Midoriya," the man responded. 15 years of age, and no siblings. Surprisingly, he had his quirk registered a few days ago, he stated in a baffled thought. Interesting. Play the audio log, Sensei said. Didn't even need to see his face to know that the man was smirking. "All right," the man said as he took the cassette from his bag and shuffled a bit before he inserted it into the player. A few moments of static played through, until the familiar voice of the doctor emanated through the room. Both men listened intently at the word of a dead doctor. "Sensei, I'm not too sure about the mental health of this quirkologist," the man meekly added. Child, let us not question the man's mental stability. Instead, we should focus on the boy's quirk," Sensei replied. The cassette cut back into static as the man removed the tape from the player. "The child ... he intrigues me. I wish to learn more," Sensei stated. "Oh, of course, Sensei," he replied while shuffling in his bag for a bit before he retrieved another cassette labeled number 2. The cassette went back into its static as the room filled with silence once more. "Is there more information on the boy?" Sensei asked. "No, sorry, Sensei. But during the harvest we have accidentally burned the last cassette alongside the body," he stated with hitched breath, a mistake he had made. He knows that he should watch his words with extreme care, or else Midoriya might not be the only one going home headless. "I see. Michai, find this boy. Send Querite and Kunturit to bring the child. I expect him at my doorstep." "Understand," Sensei stated. But before Michai could even reply, Sensei cut the call short. "How did I even drag myself into this situation?" Michai asked himself with a stressed sigh. He fished his phone from his pocket, and after a few button presses, he called the pair of bounty hunters. "Hello, Kondrit. Yeah, Sensei has a need for your services." "Where's Querite?" "Picking up ammo." "All right, meet me up in 30 minutes around the Kyoto prefecture. I'll give you the details there." "Good day," Michai said as he sighed once more. "I almost feel bad for the boy," he stated before leaving the shady bar. Izuku sighed. He rested his chin on his palm. Today just wasn't his day, but when will it be? Izuku heard the bell ring before a groan escaped his mouth. He was anticipating the flood of questions and queries his classmates were about to give him. It was just a matter of time. Soon enough, like he predicted, a classmate with rocks for hair approached him. "Hi, Izuku," he greeted. The boy responded with a weak smile and light wave. "Suo, your quirk. You can take your head off." "That's pretty cool," Raku added while he pulled up a chair to talk to the boy. Izuku was fighting the urge to roll his eyes. Unfortunately, several other classmates added and started to press him about his quirk. Izuku buried his head in between his arms. He could feel the light tug of the string keeping his act together. It wasn't that he was used to this kind of treatment, but he was only treated like a human when he received his quirk. His curse quirk. Deku. Snapping him out of his pessimistic stupor, Katsuki explosively approached. Yes, the main reason Izuku on how Izuku found his quirk has arrived. He was feeling many emotions that time. Anger, disgust, envy. Izuku was not sure on how he made sense of jumbled up emotions within. But he was definitely feeling something strong for Katsuki. Izuku scowled lightly under the hands covering his mouth. Fight me, Katsuki sneered with a malicious scowl. Izuku shot up and looked around the room to see his classmates shrugging. Their guesses were as good as his on the sudden request. Fuck you, Deku. Fight me, he said, one hand gripping heavily on itself, making it show the whites of his knuckles. The other hand outstretched, small white sparks of his quirk forming. We'll fight on the roof, you useless prick. He cocked his head to signal Izuku should follow. The boy mentioned looked around to see his classmates starting to murmur about the situation. Of course, he thought to himself before he sighed and got up before he followed Katsuki. To which the boy grinned wildly. Izuku knows whatever Katsuki has mind won't affect his own health. Why am I even doing this? He asked himself while Katsuki trotted in front of him towards the roof stairs. I guess I'm really doing this, he asked himself once on top of the roof. Katsuki walked to the opposite side of the roof, his form quickly going into a fighting stance. But Izuku, instead of going on a fighting stance as well, Izuku looked behind him. Izuku leaned on the railing while looking down below. Katsuki's eyebrow twitched. What was the point in bringing him here if he just wasn't going to fight? Okay, geek. You've got your damn quirk now we fight, Katsuki yelled. Izuku shook his head before he motioned his arm for Katsuki to come closer. Izuku still had his head looking down at the ground below them. The familiar sight of construction materials and pipes had a melancholic and almost sad vibe to them. What the fuck are you telling me? Katsuki sneered. You know, I really looked up to you when we were young, Izuku said slowly with a sigh as he scratched the border of his stitches. You were a headstrong leader, making even high school students tremble in front of your quirk, Izuku began. Katsuki snickered arrogantly. Of course they'd tremble. It's cause I have a damn good quirk, Katsuki stated. Yes, everybody said so. Teachers, parents, classmates, friends. Well, your friends I mean. They all seem to love your quirk, while I just ratted away. Kaken, has anybody actually judged you for your quirk? Your attitude? Your personality? Your language? Your temper? Before Izuku could even finish, Katsuki intervened. I already hear enough from the old hag at home. I don't need you adding shit, Katsuki said. The green-haired boy chuckled bitterly, something the ash blonde didn't expect. Kaken, do you know how I found my quirk out? Izuku asked the seemingly innocent question. Anger still flowing within the ash blonde, Katsuki rolled his eyes and shrugged. Don't fucking know. It could have popped off for all I care. You know, Kaken, Izuku started, his smile wavering for a moment before he started talking again. That time you told me to jump off. I did, but it didn't help. Kaken, do you really hate me that much? The world already cursed me with this atrocious quirk. I can't even kill myself correctly. Izuku didn't notice he was crying until he felt his socks getting wet from the tears dripping down. Kaken, why would you become a hero? Izuku coughed away his tears before he steeled his convictions. Izuku's eyes showed rebellion. He was finally doing something he had wanted to do ever since Katsuki started bullying him. Izuku was standing up to Katsuki. With a sharp intake of breath and all the confidence he had mustered up for the day, Izuku yelled, "You're no hero, Kaken." His teary red eyes spelt festering hatred. How can someone like you be called a hero? You're nothing more than a bomb ready to blow. Katsuki stared wide-eyed at the boy. Realization hit him. Katsuki had provoked a suicide attempt. But not only that, Katsuki was the reason Izuku was mostly alone. If he hadn't yelled back, Katsuki would've kicked his teeth in. But the boy pressed on, his hand formed into fists while he gave Izuku a death glare. It was a joke, you nerd. How dumb can you be to fall for a joke? Katsuki asked, his blood boiling. Izuku wiped most of his tears down, his smile wavering to a pained expression. You know, Katsuki, I never have told you why I'm always late. Izuku started once more. Who the fuck asked you about that? For the longest time, I've been depressed. I struggle to find a reason to wake up in the morning most of the time, Kaken. And seeing you kick someone while they're down just makes me sick. This emptiness, I feel, it was replaced with disgust. Disgust towards you. I can't even remember a time when I felt something that made me feel alive. I wanted out of this world. I wanted everyone to stop worrying about me. I wanted my mother to move on and forget about me. But I hesitated. Several times. Until just a few days ago. But look where that got me. And here you are. An aspiring hero. Sometimes I don't think the word means what it's supposed to mean. Izuku had seen the look on Katsuki's face. First was denial, then pity, then finally anger. What was he supposed to be angry about? You sad fuck. Don't you think I already know you're depressed? Katsuki retorted back. I already saw that fucking fake-ass smile you put on every day. I kick your ass every day as a distraction. A distraction you're too dense to pick up. Sometimes you need to fucking dull down your emotions fucktard. Sometimes you're just too sensitive for your own damn good. Christ, you're so stupid. Katsuki yelled back. The green-haired boy went bewildered. What kind of backwards logic does he have? Izuku thought to himself against Katsuki. The boy was taken aback from the conversation for a moment. Katsuki had provoked a suicide, but was still headset on blaming other people. It took a moment for Izuku to recuperate. He was still stunned from the other boy's hard-headedness. He didn't actually have a response to say. Izuku was still bewildered at the other boy. Mika walked down towards a small family-owned cafe in the Kyoto prefecture. He was gripping onto the government files of Midoriya Izuku. It wasn't very surprising to the man that the two thugs were there early. But Michai always was nervous when he had these little meetings. Hello again, Michai Kinturit, a young man with blonde straight hair and a scar around the left side of his lip greeted with a smile. EYO, the boss needing us again. I hope he gives us another plaything. A loud and rambunctious Querate greeted as well. He had white hair with gray highlights all dripping down his hair, while he had one horn on the left side of his head. Sharp teeth filled the toothy grin he bore. Yes, bring this child to sensei. You can do whatever you want with him since his quirk would just negate anything you would do, Michai said as he tossed the folder towards Kinturit. The blonde took the folder and skimmed through the files. Midoriya Izuku, a child. What is his quirk? There's no info here, Kinturit asked with a raised eyebrow before Querate snatched it from his hand. Ooh, this kid looks nice. I wonder how loud he screams, the white-haired man asked with a toothy grin plastered through his face. He examined the freckles, the messy green and black hair. He saw the forest green eyes. Querate had to have this kid. All right, I believe my friend here is getting a bit too excited, the blonde stated before smacking the head of his partner. Just get it done so I don't have to stress, sensei. Taking my head, Michai said with a sigh and rubbed his temples for a moment. The headaches from stress have only gotten worse. When's the deadline? Querate asked. Michai responded with an arm cross and a raised eyebrow. By the end of the month, he replied before he took off. Lovely, Querate stated while giving an animalistic grin. Please contain yourself this time. Sensei wasn't pleased with the last catch, the blonde man stated with a disapproving tone. He could not control his more feral friend. Hey, you think if we catch him now, we'd get to play with him for a bit? The horned man asked with a tilt of his head. You and your ruthless games. You think way too much about leisure rather than the job at hand. But I do agree with you on starting this job as soon as possible, Kinturit started. But his nagging was cut short by Querate's complaints. But man, I need to feed. If I don't nab this kid, then what am I gonna eat? He whined. I don't know and I don't care. Anyways, let's start. Kinturit took a look at Izuku's photograph before tossing it over towards Querate. The horned man took a big smile before he looked intently at the boy's photograph. Querate's eyes took a bloody red glowing hue before returning to his usual milky gray. Gotcha, he exclaimed before pointing towards the northern part of the Kyoto prefecture. He isn't far, I'd say a kilometer or two. Very well then. Let us hope that he will be more cooperative than the last target, Kinturit stated before the two started walking towards Kyoto Elementary. Izuku had wanted this day to go a bit better, but of course nothing went his way. The boy had the unwanted attention of his peers asking him about his limb removal quirk and whatnot. Bakugo was stating that he was his own reason of suicide, and Izuku was still being semi-harassed about him just being him. It wasn't a nice experience. But he had to press on, only 10 more months to endure before he had to take the regional exam, and possibly get into UA. Become a hero he always wanted, and make sure that he becomes a hero, a real hero. Not like Katsuki who just wants to mash enemies' heads in. A savior, someone to look up to. But the main problem he was facing was how he could use his quirk in a fight. But that thought had to wait for home, as the boy trotted down the sidewalk towards his apartment. Unknowing to the boy, he was being followed by 2 men. Hey kid, Izuku almost tripped before a man caught him by the shoulder. Izuku looked up to see a man with white hair, a single horn, and very sharp teeth. Almost tasted gravel there, kiddo, he stated. Oh, thanks, Izuku mumbled back, a bit embarrassed that a stranger caught him. Don't thank him, a voice in a crowded street made Izuku turn around for a bit before he saw uninteresting people pass by. Izuku looked back at the stranger to see him completely gone. Then he felt the soft cloth of a handkerchief on his mouth and nose. Then everything was white. Arg, Izuku groggily opens his eyes while groaning in both exhaustion and confusion. The boy felt his headache pulse with pain. The stitches in between his neck itched with his wriggling blood beneath. The green-haired boy felt slight tugs of rope where his hands were. He widened his eyes before wriggling and struggling in place. Yes. The boy remembered that he was kidnapped. It wasn't really surprising to him that bad thing had happened to him, but he didn't expect things to happen to this degree. He squirmed before he looked around for his surroundings. He saw crates of different sizes surround him, while he glanced up to the ceiling. He took a peek at metal sims acting as a roof while the red hues of the sun peeked through the holes and crevices of the building. Speaking of which, turning his head around as glanced around some more. He was panicking, his skin and clothes wet with his cold sweat while he looked for an escape route. Oh, right, Izuku thought to himself while mentally smacking himself in the head. He remembered he was tied up. Shuffling of footsteps and voices could be heard opposite to where he was facing. Izuku immediately panicked once more. He had no idea on what these people wanted from him. He had no cash, he had no land, and he certainly didn't have looks. So the boy just puckered up and closed his eyes, waiting and bracing himself for the worst. And basically, I pretty much laid waste to his bathroom. It was hilarious to watch him try and clean it up. Izuku heard a coarse and wild voice bellow out before another man added his 2 cents. You're disgusting, you know that. Another voice added, this time it was smooth and deep. He heard the stopping of footsteps right behind him as he tensed. He kissed his teeth and hoped for the best. "Io, Kinturit. I think the kid's awake," the gravelly voice said. "I'm not blind," the man known as Kinturit replied. "Child, you can drop the facade. We know you're awake," Kinturit added once more. Izuku opened his eyes slowly as the two men walked their way in front of him. Izuku took a glance at two tall men, one lanky and extremely slim, while the other was actually healthy looking. The thin one had white hair with gray highlights flowing down while he had a single horn on the left temple. He bore sharp teeth that filled his toothy grin while he wore a black hoodie and jeans with plain sneakers. The other man was tall and fit. He had silky and straight blonde hair that reached his cheeks. He had blue cerulean eyes and had a small, almost unnoticeable scar on the left side of his lip. He was dapper, that much Izuku could guess, but he was an accomplice nonetheless. Oh. I can't wait to mess this kid up." The wildly grinning man began to squirm while shaking the chair Izuku was shackled to. The immortal boy shivered at the thought of what the sickening man would do to him. "Ugh, please don't. Sensei almost killed me from what happened last time," Kinturit said with an annoyed grunt and tired sigh. He rubbed his temples in hopes of relieving some stress that his partner was giving him. "Oh, come on. At least let me test his quirk out." The feral man whined with a pout. Kinturit had a tick mark by the side of his head. He was getting annoyed by his loud partner. "What's the point? He doesn't even have quirk info on him." "I'd suggest we just keep him till the cops cool down a bit," the blonde retorted. "Awa, I think he has some super secret opus quirk. Don't you think? Why do you think Sensei went through the hassle of getting us to catch the kid?" The anorexic man stated back. "Sensei, is that the boss? Why would he want me? Is it because of my quirk? Damn it, how did it get out? I thought the doctor said he'd keep it under wraps." Izuku thought to himself as his blood turned cold. "Actually," Kinturit pondered, his curiosity getting the better of him as he looked back to the boy. The boy gave an awkward scowl trying to intimidate the two men, to which he failed miserably. "Let's ask Michai actually. I'm as curious as you are by now," Kinturit said as he fished a phone out of his pocket. "Hell yeah." The horned man pumped his fist in joy. "Calm yourself, Quirite," the blonde bounced back while his phone rang. Izuku was panicking even more. Someone knew of the secondary effects of his quirk. But what were they gonna do with him? Experiments? Torture? Something he couldn't even imagine. It was all up to his imagination to think of how wrong this could possibly turn out to be. "Hello again," Michai Kinturit greeted warmly while the other line asked a quick what. "Oh, nothing really, we're just curious on why Sensei is so interested on the boy," the suited man asked. "Sensei wants the boy for his immortality and regenerative abilities. Now drag that child to him before he beheads me," Michai yelled before Kinturit dropped the call and smiled a bit. He turned to the boy, his eyes sparkling a bit in jealousy. "That's one hell of a quirk you've got there, kid," he stated. Quirite practically jumped for joy while Izuku was still trying to get out of his shackles. "What's his quirk? What's his quirk? What's his quirk?" Quirite whined while shaking in pure excitement. "From what I've gathered, Midoriya here has some sort of regenerative quirk. He's immortal to boot," Kinturit replied. Quirite widened his eyes once he heard this fact, his wild grin turning beastly while he gazed up on the boy. "Oh my dear sweet Izuku. We're going to have such a wonderful time together," he yelled out. Quirite fished out a gun from the holster on his side before he took a shot into Izuku's arm. The boy screamed while he held back tears from his eyes, his wound quickly resealing itself as Quirite bellowed with laughter. "Yes, yes, yes," he screamed, his dull gray eyes shining red with pure ecstasy. "Wonderful," Quirite screamed. "I think I'm going to be sick," Kinturit said, while holding back the vomit he was oh so eager to get out. "Midoriya, I'm very sorry on what's about to happen. I feel sorry for you, but I cannot hold back my partner for long. I can't stand to watch what happens next." Kinturit gave Izuku a sad, yet a kinda disgusted look. Izuku was confused at first, but was immediately taken out of his confusion by another gunshot to his arm. "Ugh!" Izuku yelled out when the pain settled in once more, his mind becoming numb due to the pain he was experiencing. Izuku held his breath, the sweat dripping from his face and body became cold. Kinturit by this time had already stormed off from the warehouse. Quirite was in pure ecstasy while he continued to torture the boy. Izuku kept on healing his wounds while Quirite continued to add more. Kinturit sighed as he walked down the busy street. He really was disgusted at his partner, but their tandem was so good that he had no choice but to comply. He didn't really agree on most of Quirite's methods, but he couldn't deny the fact that the other man had real talent when it came down to tracking down prey, and that was before he had his quirk. The ability to destroy any given biological residue while the other had the ability to track someone's location just by sight was truly a fearsome combination. But everything that the two did had a price to pay. Kinturit didn't need a scholarship to know that Quirite was a sadist, especially considering the extra factor that was needed to use his quirk. But it was nothing compared to what Kinturit's condition was. A toxic chemical was needed to fulfill the meter and use his quirk. The suave and blonde man took a cigarette as he fished a lighter from his pocket. He leaned against an electrical pole as he watched the sun beginning to set. He lit the cancer stick while he got his phone from his pocket and began scrolling through pictures. Yes, the man needed nicotine to erase his tracks. Not just his tracks bare, mind you, he could erase any information on anyone given enough time. And nicotine. Being able to destroy DNA residue like hair, blood, and spit was indeed a beneficiary factor in hunting down targets, just in case the police and heroes were on their tail. Kenturit had to take in a chemical that killed him from the inside just for the man to cover their tracks. It wasn't something he was too keen on, so he had to come in terms with being very precise and thorough when destroying evidence without the use of his quirk. If only Quirite was a neat person. The blonde sighed as he took a peek at the photo on his phone. He and his 3 best friends in a bar. Kenturit smirked with slight nostalgia, even though the photo was only a year old. He found it slightly amusing that one of his friends had turned into his boss. He glanced to the far right of his phone. He peeked at the ratty gray hair the man sported, while he had scars alongside his neck and chapped lips with the scar. Not the most attractive of people, but quite charming in his own way. Now that he remembered, he took note on how childish his friend acted. Well, it was a nice contrast to his other acquaintance on the far right. A man with slitted yellow eyes and having mist instead of skin. Never in his life had he witnessed such a polite and threatening man. Kenturit grinned a bit. The blonde remembered when the mist man told him to change into a suit and tie. The other man in the middle and right next to Kenturit was none other than the errand boy, Michai. The timid and slightly fishy man was bearing a big and dumb smile. Kenturit raised his eyebrow when he saw a notification and when his phone began to ring. He took note of the unknown number and picked up. "Hello, who is this?" Kenturit began. "Awa, don't you remember your old pal?" A dry and vicious voice emanated from the phone. Kenturit sighed in relief and gave a playful smirk. "I see you got a new burner, Tamira," he responded. "So, to what pleasure do I owe this call?" Kenturit asked. "Nothing really, Sensei was just wondering when the kid is gonna arrive," Tamira said through the phone. Kenturit gave a slightly nervous and exasperated sigh. "Unfortunately, Quirite is having another one of his episodes. I don't think the kid will be able to make it anytime this week," the blonde replied. A low whistle could be heard from the other line. "It's that time of the month again, I see," Tamira joked. "Unfortunately." Kenturit shook his head. "I swear, sometimes I feel like I should find a replacement for that guy. I've had too many times that I almost got myself killed because of Quirite's slip-ups." "Nah man, that guy's good. You just have the guy do what he needs to do," Tamira replied. "Do." Kenturit sometimes pondered a bit before speaking. "Sometimes I wish I had Michai, you, or even Kirigiri as a partner rather than that brute." He spoke. "Michai is quirkless, I'm too impatient for such side quests, and Kirigiri is too busy attending to the bar. Besides, he has the perfect quirk for tacking down targets," the rat-haired man exclaimed. "You can't deny that he's damn good at his job." "I know." Kenturit spoke. "I just wish that he wasn't as brutish and sadistic as he is now." He does it for enjoyment." "Wouldn't be surprised if you did the same if you were sadistic as well," Tamira joked. "You know damn well I'll never do something as disgusting as torture a poor child just to power their quirk," Kenturit said with a puff of smoke from his cigarette. "Yet here you are, pumping chemical cancer in yourself just to escape the cops," the gray-haired man replied. Kenturit clicked his tongue in annoyance before responding. "At least I'm the only one affected by the effects. Quirite, on the other hand, he needs other people to fuel his quirk. That isn't good if he finds himself without a suitable source," Kenturit replied. He shifted a bit as he looked towards the now dark night sky. "You gotta give him props though, he always seems to find a source." Unfortunately, Kenturit shook his head in disapproval. Inko had felt a deep and unexplainable feeling of dread when she had sat down to watch the 6 o'clock news. One part of her was screaming that Izuku was in trouble while the other trusted her son that he would be safe. But something felt off. She knew something was strange the moment he didn't arrive at home on his usual 4:30 p.m. schedule. She gave him the benefit of the doubt at first, and Ko thought that Izuku was caught up in after-school activities. But she remembered that Izuku had never signed up for any clubs or sports. She frantically got off the couch and started making calls. Ring, ring, ring. "Hello, Inko. How have you been?" A feminine voice replied from the telephone. "Oh Mitsuki, it's about Izuku. He hasn't come home yet. I thought it was strange since he always came back at 4:30 on the dot. But for some reason, he hasn't even answered my calls." Mitsuki, can you ask Katsuki if he's seen my son?" she asked, tears staining her eyes and sadness and worry strangling her voice. "I'll get right on it." The usually playful voice of Mitsuki Bakugo became serious as she heard Inko's speech. Inko had heard the ash blonde drop the phone and a loud oi brat could be heard as background noise. "What do you want, you old hag?" Katsuki Bakugo asked with a scowl as he descended from his room upstairs. "You seen Izuku around lately?" the other blonde asked. "Yeah, at school," he plainly replied before attempting to go back upstairs. "Hey brat, I ain't done with you yet," she scolded before pulling Katsuki back downstairs by his ear. "Duh, you crazy old hag," replied. "Did you see Izuku go anywhere fishy after school?" she asked him again. "Hell no, Deku's got nothing to do after school." "Why, what happened?" he asked with a skeptically raised eyebrow. "At the moment, he's missing." Inko starting to fret. "You should know better about your friend," she replied. Katsuki winced when he read her say friend. His hands started to shake as they formed into fists. "I'm going back to my room," shouted Katsuki as he rushed upstairs. Mitsuki gave a loud and audible sigh as she walked back to the telephone as she picked it up. "Sorry Inko, Katsuki hasn't seen Izuku other than at school," she said with a hitch of guilt. Mitsuki knows that Inko is probably crying her eyes out right now. That's okay. I'll go and check up B by the P police station now. B by Mitsuki and Co replied with a hitch in her breath. Mitsuki could hear the soft sobs before she dropped the call. Mitsuki bit her bottom lip. She couldn't stand seeing her best friend like that. Not to mention her kid was missing. She had to call Musaru and help in the search. Katsuki's breaths were heavy and broken. Guilt racked his mind as he broke down into a soft whimper. He hated himself for this. The moment Izuku told his story, Katsuki's heart began to twist, and felt like it was being put in between a vice. The cold sweat that dripped down into his shirt felt like all the sins he had committed against the boy. He had both thanked the gods and cursed himself for the poor excuse of a reason he had made up during his confrontation on the roof. He even laughed at himself for making such a thing up, such a twisted way of reasoning. He even questioned himself when Izuku had lectured him about his quirk. His quirk, the only thing that people liked about him. Basically anything else was practically chopped liver compared to his wonderful, amazing, and powerful quirk. Izuku was right, as much as Katsuki hated to admit it. Izuku was right. He had no right to become a hero. He scowled and his knuckles began to turn white from all the strength he was putting in his fists. He hated this feeling. The feeling of guilt, self-loathing, and uncertainty. He was used to anger and happiness, but he could only imagine what Izuku was enduring every day. Katsuki had no choice but to blame himself for pushing Izuku over the edge and filling his head with suicidal thoughts. After all, it was Katsuki who spread the rumors of Izuku's quirklessness. It felt so horrible, only now did he realize on what a horrendous person he actually was. He felt anger surge through his veins once more. How could he let this little joke go this far? Katsuki was sickened with himself, for the first time in his life. The world doesn't revolve around a single person, and he was regretting only realizing that now. Damn it. A soft yet stern voice emerged from his throat as he wiped the tears from his cheeks. Damn it, he punched the drywall with slight force as he remembered the saddened and angered look Izuku gave him on the roof. Damn it. He punched the wall with more force as he recalled the moment Izuku had tears straining his eyes while he spoke. Fuckdamnit. He reeled back his fist and gave a strong enough punch to make a small duvet the size of his fist in the drywall. He broke down on his knees once more as he clutched his now bleeding right fist. He recalled Izuku speaking about wanting to end it all. It hurt him. It hurt him to his core. How can I become a hero if I can't even beat these damned feelings? He thought to himself. He gazed up as he brought his fist up to his face. He saw minor scratches and a little swelling after his little episode. Katsuki scowled as he laid on his back and gazed up onto the ceiling. The veins on his temples began to pulse as he cursed himself for such thoughts. He needed to become a hero, for himself, for his family, for his aunt and Co., and finally, for Izuku. I hate you, you know. Katsuki spoke to himself as he remembered the hero fanboy. He dropped his right arm to the side as his breath became a bit calmer. He knew damn well that this feeling of dread and guilt was never going to go away unless he did something about it. Time skipped 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks, 3 dread-filled weeks. And Ko could barely go to sleep every night as she kept thinking about her dear Izuku being in danger. Katsuki had been acting more distant and more impatient and quick to anger than ever. Mitsuki and Musaru had also been helping and Ko look for her child. Every day, they would help her pass on flyers about her child, while in the night, they would search till the wee hours of night looking for him. The police were of no help either. They kept telling her about how they had it covered. But it had been 3 weeks since they had any use. That was, of course, until Inko had enough and decided to hire a personal investigator. The teal-haired woman had been thankful towards Musaru for pitching the idea. She had been searching through the list that he had suggested, until she came upon a very trustworthy name. A name that she couldn't really put her finger on. She felt most safe with dialing that number. Hello. Inko called as she wiped her eyes from the fresh tears that dripped. Hello, yes. This is Naomasa Tsukachi, private investigator for hire. Would you like to file a reservation? The calm and collected voice replied. Why yes, of course. Who? Inko stuttered. I'll later afternoon a good tea time. Because it's very important, she spoke. But of course. What name should I file this down on? Naomasa asked. Izuku Midoriya, please, the teal-haired woman replied. Please report to the Hori Tea Leaves Cafe in the downtown area of South Kyoto. If not, you could always suggest a meeting point, the investigator stated. It's fine, I'm actually quite close. Thank you for your time, and co-responded. Likewise, Naomasa stated before he hung the call. The black-haired man took his beige hat and equally beige trench coat before taking his leave from his cluttered office. He really heard the desperation from his client's voice. And Ko had waited for several tense hours as she fiddled between sobbing and wiping the tears from her face. She had never in her life thought that her son would get captured. She knew that he would become a hero and she had no right to stop him from chasing his dreams. But he got kidnapped, mere months before the entrance test to his dream. If she couldn't protect him now, how could she trust him to protect himself in the future? A sad, sad thought that passed by her mind, as much as she hated to admit it. Inko wanted to hole up Izuku and keep him by the house. She just wanted to see him safe and sound. but Inko knew she couldn't keep him locked up forever. A mother's love is something that cannot be measured. The same thing could be said about Inko's current worry meters. She hated being pessimistic, but she had to come in terms with preparing herself for the worst, even though she might never see her child again. She wiped the tear that slid down her left cheek while she commuted on the train. It wasn't any fun. All the memories of her poor child engulf her head. She needed him back. Inko had started a slight hate towards law enforcement and the sorts. For one, they never really seemed to care. They swept his case right under the rug after they couldn't find a lead. And finally, second, they just looked at her like she was crazy. Never in her life did she receive so many pitied gazes and looks. She was just a mother looking for her poor child. It filled her with dread the moment she noticed he hadn't come home yet, and until now, that feeling of dread has not yet left. She had finally arrived at the small family-owned restaurant. She shuffled as she sat by a window and ordered a simple cup of coffee as she waited for the private investigator. Several minutes passed by as her shaking hands gripped the cup and she glanced around intently, in search for the pie. "I assume you're Izuku Midoriya," a friendly voice emerged as she stared at a tall man with black hair and a friendly face with a beige trench coat on. Oh, why yes," Inko had retorted. The man took a seat parallel to her own as he took out a notepad and paper. "Now first off, I will say that I keep the information on my clients completely tucked away. I only disclose information to outer sources if absolutely necessary. And, before we start, I just need to say that you might feel a bit off," Naomasa said as Inko quirked her eyebrow. "Why? What's about to happen?" she asked. "Nothing really, I'm just going to use my quirk so that no one can eavesdrop," Naomasa said. At that moment everything seemed to pause before a blue hue engulfed the room. The blue tinge only everything but the area they were in. What's happening?" Inko had asked, gripping onto the armrests on the chair in shock. "Oh, it's just my quirk. It seals off any sound from an area. In short, we can't hear anything outside our little bubble. And nothing can hear what's here, either," the plain-looking man stated with a matter-of-fact tone in his voice. After a few seconds of recomposing herself, Inko had calmed significantly down. "Now, first things first. What seems to be the problem?" Naomasa asked with a smile as Inko had shuffled underneath the intense atmosphere. "It's my son. He's been missing for 3 weeks. Oh, I knew I should have gotten him a cell phone," she said with a sad tone in her voice. Naomasa jotted down everything that she said. He truly felt the desperation in her voice. It broke his heart the moment he heard that her child had been taken from her arms. Such a nice woman's kid had been kidnapped. Whatever lowlife that had done this, he swore he would find. "Ah, I see," he spoke with a false tone of calmness. In truth, he was shaking internally with anger. What kind of sick bastard would do that to an innocent child? "Does he have any defining features? Hair, scars, skin color? And what is the name of this poor boy?" asked the man. Oh, Inko faltered for a moment. "He has black hair, but also with dark green highlights. Like my hair color," she spoke with hand gestures pointing to her own head. "He has freckles on his cheeks as well. He's a teenager. Around my height, if not, a tad bit taller." "Very well," Naomasa stated, in between the conversation. "His name is Izuku Midoriya," Inko added. Rubbing a hand on his chin after he wrote everything down, Naomasa took a look at his notes. Nothing struck too out of the ordinary. He quirked his eyebrow at this. Nothing made sense. Why would a young boy be forcibly taken from his family? Unless, well, Naomasa didn't want to think about that possibility. "Say, Mrs. Midoriya, what do you think would be motivation for anyone to capture young Izuku?" he questioned. Oh. She pursed her lips. She thought about his appearance. "No, I don't think anyone would be that rash about him," she thought, until she remembered the little meeting she had with the quirkologist. "Dr. Nagusaka," she whispered. Naomasa quirked his eyebrow at the whisper. "Pardon, Mrs. Midoriya?" he asked. The quirkologist. "Dr. Tori Nagusaka. He kept ragging on about using my son as a lab rat for his quirk," she stated with clear and visible disgust in her tone. "Dr. Nagusaka, I don't know if you have heard, Mrs. Midoriya, but Dr. Nagusaka has been one of the unjustly purged doctors among dozens upon dozens other quirkologists and pediatricians," Naomasa stated, gaining a surprised gasp from Inko. She almost dropped her cup of coffee. What? That's horrible. What happened?" she asked back. "We currently don't have any leads on that matter, unfortunately," he stated before he took on a more serious tone. "Though, I do question on why someone would kidnap him for his quirk." Oh, she hiccuped a bit as she spoke. Inko pursed her lips while she looked around in thought. She had always thought that her boy's quirk was a forbidden fruit that no one else rather than her son could access. But then again, technology was advancing every moment. She had no idea what was happening with her boy. His quirk. She stuttered, putting a fretting hand up to her lip. They might use him for his quirk. She became teary-eyed again, panicking under the realization that had just occurred. "Midoriya, Mrs. Midoriya, please calm down and tell me his quirk," Naomasa stated as he put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Oh, okay. I am fine," she spoke after a moment of adrenaline and worry. Her hitched breath stabilized. I'm fine," she said. "Mrs. Midoriya, what is your son's quirk?" The pie asked once more. Immortality, she half whispered, garnering a quirked eyebrow from Naomasa. Pardon, but could you repeat that again? He asked. Immortality, she yelled back. Naomasa was taken aback from the information. H's quirk. Mugen. It denied him death, he could even take his head off. Have you experienced that? Seeing your own child carrying their head like L luggage. She screamed, tears flowing from her eyes. Immortality. He thought to himself for a moment. There's only one bastard that could have the quirk to utilize that. TSSK. I might need backup after all, he mentally stated. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Midoriya. I assure you, I will find the child, he stated, and Ko had looked up to him in hope. But he had to pay a visit with an old friend once more. He dispelled the little bubble of noise cancellation while they said their goodbyes. After the whole fiasco with Mrs. Midoriya, Naomasa had taken it upon himself and an old acquaintance to find the boy. In no way was he about to let all for one take such a powerful quirk. Hello, Naomasa stated in an urgent tone. Tsukachi, how's it been? The friendly voice asked back. Not well. Not well, listen Toshinori. I think all for one is on the move once more. I have a client that has had their child taken from them. The child has an immortality quirk. After that statement, the room Naomasa had been occupying had taken on a deathly silence. Even the other person on the line had stopped a bit to process the information he was given. I'll be right there, Toshinori replied. He ended the call as soon as he heard all for one. Izuku wheezed with hitched breath as he looked down upon his quickly healing wounds. He narrowed his eyes as he looked up towards the sadistically smirking man. What's wrong, kiddo? Don't got any more bark behind that non-existent bite? Quirk asked, shuffling his butterfly knife away from Izuku's eye. Stop it. Please. Why are you doing this? Izuku whimpered out from the chair he was tied on. Izuku had his uniform in shred by this point. Everything hurt for mere moments before he was treated with a new sort of pain. It wasn't getting any more easier to endure. No blood, no carcass, and no organs have been spilled, even though his warden had tried very hard to do so. No, I'm almost done. Just give me a tad, my meter's almost full, Quirk stated as he pulled out his gun from the holster. Kid, we had so many good times together, but Kinturit and Sensei are already howling on me to give you up. How I'll miss you, kid, the horned man stated as he positioned the barrel up in between Izuku's eyes. Please, stop. Why are you doing this? Izuku pleaded, trying to stall so he can ready himself for the pain. He might be immortal, but he can still feel every jolt of pain that struck him. Well, Quirk began, since it's our last day together, I might as well fill you in, he spoke as he took a chair from across the room and sat down in front of the boy. You see, my quirk, sweet Izuku, requires sustenance to function. Well, it might not be a destructive quirk, but it's strong enough to need a third-party power source, Quirk said with a sickly smile, as he began to twirl the gun around his hand. I can locate anybody down to the precise millimeter as long as I know what they look like, but for this to happen I need something else. And I couldn't thank the gods more for the needed requirement, he said with a euphoric tone. Izuku half listened as he tried shuffling his hands and escaping the ropey confines. The cries and screams of the innocent. Isn't that such a wonderful thing? Oh, how I love my job, Quirk stated while he hugged himself in pure ecstasy. And you, by far, are the most amazing person I had ever had the pleasure of playing with, Quirk said with a light kiss on Izuku's forehead. Too bad Sensei is gonna take you soon though. Welp, can't do shit about that I suppose, Quirk said as he cheerfully cocked his pistol back and aimed it at Izuku's forehead. Stop, Izuku mentally screamed. Stop. The gunshot, smoke following soon after the thunderclap of gunpowder. Izuku shut his eyes tight, turning his head slightly as he braced himself for the pain. The pain never came. Quirk widened his eyes. Izuku slowly opened his own emerald pupils. What the fuck, kid? The horned man asked. Any leads? Toshinori asked while he glanced out the rushing car of Naomasa. The rusty blonde peered out the window and clutched his chest. He could feel it. He could feel his gut wrenching in worry and distraught. Especially so when he learned that Sensei was involved. Nothing as of late, Naomasa replied as he focused on driving. He too could feel the pressure of the situation. Immortality was something not to be trifled with. And if it were to go to a man like him, then nothing would be able to stop him. Mostly noise complaints and whatnot. But I have a hunch on a certain area, the detective added. How so? The pro-hero asked while shifting a bit in his seat as he felt his wound graze against the seatbelt. There's been an uprise in criminal activity around the eastern district of Hasu City. Not only that, but several shady characters have been spotted around the outskirts, Naomasa said. He took a quick glance back at his partner to see him clenching his fists. Several reports have stated that a bar around the outskirts of the east side of Hasu has been changed into a criminal haven. He added, then what are we waiting for? Let's go. The blonde yelled in desperation. They're only reports, Toshi. We still have to scout around for the child. Even if I have this hunch, we need to check every nook and cranny, just in case. Fine. With crossed arms, All Might looked out the window. He could feel that something bad was happening. Kinturit. An ominous voice from a screen in the corner of the bar echoed. Why yes, Sensei, the scarred man hesitantly replied. Where is the child? It has already been 3 weeks, and I haven't even been given any reports or updates on the matter. The voice said. Kintaro could feel the nervous sweat that trailed down his neck. About that. The moment he would see his partner, Kintaro was going to strangle him. Go on, Sensei responded in his commanding voice. Boom. Quirk still has the child. He's still having one of his episodes. It's strange, it's probably his longest one yet. Kintaro sheepishly responded. I see, Sensei said through the screen. Kurogiri, accompany young Kintaro and bring the child. You have already exhausted my patience. The voice commanded as the two men silently gulped. Yes, Sensei, Kurogiri replied as he laid down the glass he was cleaning on the counter. The mist man walked past the bar counter as the screen cut back to static, then turned off. He brushed his suit from dirt before looking towards the blonde before him. Come Kintaro, before both of us gets killed, he stated calmly as he opened up a swirly dark purple vortex next to him. The blonde nodded swiftly as he accompanied the polite villain into the portal as it shut as they exited. Inko was sweating in worry. The several bins of tissue paper from wiping her tears was thrown since it almost consumed the entire living room. Mitsuki was there as well, consoling her childhood friend. She honestly felt so bad seeing her friend in the state that she was in. But she had little to offer her in terms of help. She could see it. The ash blonde could see how broken Inko was just by looking at her eyes. It showed a woman who was dead inside. It didn't help that her own son became a bit nippy in terms of his attitude. Katsuki has become more irritable, especially when mentioning his own childhood friend. She had a sneaking suspicion that her son was hiding something, but brushed that thought off to the side at the moment. Since she already had a problem with Inko and Izuku, she didn't want to add her own family to the shit list of problems that she currently had. She would have to confront him about that later. There, Inko, you already hired a private investigator. I'm sure he'll be able to find Izuku. If not, I'm gonna beat him down myself, Mitsuki said with a reassuring grin while she rubbed her friend's back in comfort while the other woman sobbed into her handkerchief. I am just worried about my child, Mitsuki and Ko spoke in between sobs. Her eyes were puffy from all the tears, her skin lacked the usual healthy glow that she had. She was getting pale, almost going thin on how little she ate every day from the stress she was feeling. I know you are. I'm worried about him too. Masaru and Katsuki are as well. Here, we're just worried about you as well. Look at you. You look like you crawled out of a grave. You seriously need to start looking after yourself more, Mitsuki pointed out to the teal-haired woman. I guess, Inko said with a dry chuckle as she wiped the tears off her cheeks. It's just that I'm so scared for my own child. I rarely gave him the chance to live his own life without me. I was going to cherish every moment I would have with him. And he's suddenly gone. Ripped away from my hands. It hurts. It really hurts and I feel so useless. I am such a terrible mother. I can't even take care of my own Kai. Before she could even finish her statement, her cheeks suddenly hurt. Inko found this strange as she heard flesh hitting flesh so loudly in her own home. After a second of caressing her hurt cheek, Inko could see Mitsuki with a frustrated look on her face, adorned with small tears threatening to spill from her own eyes. Stop saying that. Mitsuku clenched her fists tightly. Stop blaming yourself. It wasn't your fault. I was never your fault. You're not a bad mother. You didn't cause Izuku's kidnapping. You never neglected him, Inko. He was forcibly taken. Stop taking the blame and putting yourself down so much. I hate seeing you like this. So pathetic. So miserable. The ash blonde yelled while the tears began to leak from her eyes as well. If you really want to help, you shouldn't keep doing this to yourself. What would your son say if he saw you like this? What would happen when he finds you in this state? Mitsuki pleaded with her scarlet pupils showing her anger and sadness held by her friend. She couldn't stand it anymore. She needed to end this circle of self-harm. Protect at all costs. Izuku heard this strange voice in his head as he brought his arms up to somewhat defend his face from collision with a bullet. When did my arms get free? A thought that popped through his head. But that wasn't the most surprising thing he noticed. The pain of a gunshot through the head never came. What? He thought to himself as he slowly but surely opened his eyes. He cringed as he felt the long-term crusts from the corner of his eyes crumble down as he peered into the spaces in between his arms blocking him from the bullet. His non-existent heart rose up to his throat as he saw the scene before him unwind. If it wasn't for the situation that he was currently in, he would have fainted. His breathing became hitched and panicked while he panickingly watched. He saw that his hands down to his wrists were showing his skeleton. He could even confirm that his arms were bones as well, judging by the way his sleeves were drooping way lower than usual. But that wasn't the most bizarre part of this situation. He looked over his skeletal hands, and his eyes widened as he gazed upon a curtain of blood stopping the bullet mere inches away from his face. The traumatized boy could see the deformation from the curtain of blood that showed that the bullet was indeed embedded into the possible liquid. What the fuck, kid? Izuku turned his attention to the shocked Quirk, dropping his gun with trembling lips and a shocked expression on his face. The man grit his teeth as frustration seethed through his usually joyful face. He quickly picked up the gun and fired several more rounds onto the curtain of blood. The horned man cackled even more as he emptied his pistol into the curtain of blood. Wonderful, wonderful. Izuku, you really know how to make a man feel alive. He screamed as he clutched his own face and squirmed in excitement. In a mere blink of an eye, the curtain of blood began squirming and splashing around. The bullets embedded fell down to the ground with a soft clink of noise. It sloshed as the curtain became a solid tentacle of pure crimson liquid. The appendage swerved around and cut the restraints holding Izuku's ankles. It used all its strength to throttle Izuku as far away from Quirk as the large warehouse as possible. It flipped the teenager across the warehouse. The man continued to cackle as Izuku began to pant from all the stress of fearing for his life. He could hear whispers around him. He could hear a single voice repeating the same line in his head. Was he going insane? Has the trauma finally gone to him? Remove threats. Remove threats. Remove threats. Izuku could hear the whispers as he tried as hard as he can to ignore the voices in high head. He instead tried focusing towards the mentally unstable from across the building. He could feel it. He could feel the tentacle attached to his left skeletal arm writhe in agitation while he stared at the cackling psychopathic sadist. Izuku wiped a bit of sweat that slid down the side of his face as he continued to stare down the man. He was currently thinking of a plan on how the hell he would escape this situation. Izuku could feel the bloodlust escaping the man's pores as the horned man took out a switchblade from his pocket and began shouting out obscenities tied in with moans of ecstasy in between. The boy shuddered as he remembered those moments while Quirk cut through his skin while reciting a love poem. He shot himself out of his thoughts as he watched the man run towards him. Izuku could hear the whispers louden into screams, hurting his head as the shrieks became louder and louder as Quirk rushed towards the boy. Izuku knelt down into one knee as he could feel the heavy migraine hitting his head with the force of a vertical locomotive. He had thought of dodging while the man was still preoccupied with trying to cut him down once more. The green-haired boy could see how uncoordinated and erratic the movements Quirk was making. Izuku narrowly dodged the blade by a hair. Quirk was not an athletic man by a long shot. Izuku's joints were still stiff and sore from the restraints, but Quirk's movements were sluggish and Izuku could see him heaving his heavy from through the sluggish foot movement as he ran towards the boy. The boy backed into a corner as he saw Quirk quickly correct his course. He saw the man slash his blade with more gusto than usual as he rushed to the boy. But Izuku couldn't dodge this time. The migraine coursing through his head pulsed even harder than before. He was deafened by the shrieks of horror in his own head. Remove threats. The voice screamed, and before he could notice, the tentacle shot out and pierced Quirk right through the heart. Izuku hitched his breath once more. Time seemed to stop as he could feel this cold feeling all around him, even on his skeletal arms. He felt his non-existent pulse stop. Everything seemed to blur for a moment as he saw the struggling body of Quirk writhing with the tentacle still pierced through his chest. The tendril hustled the body as it lifted the man into the air. Izuku's blood ran cold as he saw the still pulsing heart of Quirk on the end of the spear-like tendril from his left skeletal arm. Quirk mumbled with a pained, yet gleeful expression on his face as he stared at Izuku, his gray eyes focusing on Izuku's green eyes. The boy squirmed and his breathing became erratic as he saw the manic gray eyes of Quirk become glazed and die right before him. He felt the pulse of the white-haired man's heart stop through the tendril that was piercing through the man's flesh. But this horror movie was not yet finished. Izuku soon felt the tendril doing something strange. A whole new fear emerged in his stomach as he saw the tendril growing in size as Quirk started to pale and thin down into skin and bones while still impaled into the business end of his quirk. Stop. Please. Please stop. Izuku fought back as the tentacle still sucked off Quirk of all his blood. The newfound liquid coursing through Izuku's veins as the tendril threw the dried up and almost bony body of Quirk across the room. Even the heart that it used to hold was nothing more than a bloodless organ. Threat removed. The whispers calmed down as Izuku sobbed at the sight he witnessed. Izuku had killed. The tentacle splashed down into Izuku's arm as it took shape of Izuku's arms. But there was too much excess. There was still extra blood swirling around the boy's form while his crimson arms began to return to its usual flesh color. The blood was writhing around him, almost responsive to Izuku's current emotion. Distraught. The boy felt terrible, absolutely disgusted in himself. He felt like he actually deserved what the man was giving him for the past 3 weeks. His head slightly aching as he heard one final whisper before the voices died down. See you soon. He still cried all the tears he was meaning to spill, not noticing the swirling portal in the corner of the warehouse. Kunturit gasped as he saw the scene in front of him. Quirk dead. The child crying in the corner as crimson liquid swirled around him. But that wasn't the most shocking thing. It was the fact that Quirk looked like he was attacked by a legion of mosquitoes. Kunturit immediately knew that they had underestimated the boy. Oh my. Kurogiri brought a misty hand up to his misty face to cover up a shocked gasp. Kurogiri, put a portal underneath the kid. Transport him to the bar as soon as possible. Kunturit commanded as the mist man complied. Protect. Izuku heard the whispers once more as the excess blood swirling around him took the form of tendrils. Once more as they attached themselves to the boy's back, it tugged his body up through the steel beams supporting the integral structure of the warehouse. 4 tentacles held on to dear life as Izuku stared at the 2 new assailants. Damn it, Kunturit cursed under his breath as he took a trench knife hidden expertly underneath his suit. He began running up towards the boy, knife in hand with a reverse grip. "Kuro, watch my back for me," he stated before rushing over to the boy, his teeth gritting as he dodged and parrying the tendrils trying to shank him. Izuku wiped his tears, trying to get a better view on the situation he was currently in. He saw half of his tentacles attempting to stab the blonde man, but Izuku's breath began to shake as he watched the man expertly dodge and block the appendages, and any blood tentacle that would hit was just transported elsewhere, happily provided by Kurogiri. "Now, Kurogiri," the blonde yelled as a purple vortex emerged right in front of him. Kinturret ran right through. The next thing Izuku knew was that the blonde man was now next to him, his trench knife poised to behead the boy. Time seemed to slow down once more as he saw the enraged and cold eyes the blonde held. With one fell swoop, Kinturret got a clean shot towards Izuku's neck. Izuku's tentacles quickly reacted as the two hung onto the steel beams with a stalemate. Izuku closed his eyes, waiting for the pain in his neck to emerge. But alas, there was no pain. As Toshinori and Naomasa were driving, scouting through the suburban area in Kyoto, they suddenly heard several gunshots, not even in short bursts. The thunderclaps were rushed and continuous before it suddenly stopped. "Naomasa," Toshinori said as he locked eyes with the black-haired man. The investigator didn't even need to say anything. Replying with an affirming nod and grunt, the detective drifted his car towards the thunderclap of gunpowder. As the motor of the car throttled with almost deafening rumbles, Toshinori began to feel this indescribable bad sensation deep in his gut, like something extremely horrible was about to happen. The man grit his teeth, unintentionally activating one for all as he dented the handle on the car. "Toshi, I understand that you're worried for the boy, and you're worried that All for One might become unstoppable. But please, take it out on the villains." "Not my car," Naomasa said with a weak chuckle, an attempt to lighten up the situation at hand. All Might didn't take the situation as lightly as his detective partner did though. The gaunt man continued to clench his teeth as he focused on the battle that he felt was about to happen. Naomasa gulped as he could feel the tense aura that Toshinori was spewing. Then he took a glance at a building. Raising his eyebrow, Naomasa took a stop in front of a suspiciously lit warehouse. Illegal activity is definitely happening here. Warehouses usually close down around sunset. "This doesn't look good," Naomasa thought to himself as he got out of his car. "Toshi, we're here." The blonde got out as well, throwing the door behind him with a slam as he inflated himself to his muscular form. But instead of his bright and hope-filling smile, All Might sported a scowl. Naomasa could feel the thickness of the situation. He sweat profusely as he saw All Might slowing walking up to the entrance of the building. The knife swiped, Izuku held his breath and closed his eyes as his tentacles reacted with blinding speed. Blood spewed out. Kinturret's arm dropped onto the ground with a wet thud as his trench knife dropped with a loud clang that echoed through the warehouse. The man scowled as he let himself drop onto his feet below. "Are you all right, Kinturret?" Kurogiri asked. "I just lost an arm, nothing too worrisome," the blonde stated as he readjusted his tie around his neck as he felt the ground underneath his shoes. "I'll be honest, I never imagined that a brat like you would be such a hassle to contain," Kinturret stated as he took the trench knife from the ground as his left arm stump continued to bleed. He picked it up while he scowled. He knew he had less of a chance now since he would be using his non-dominant hand. Izuku could feel the thirst of the tentacles protecting him as the appendages let Izuku slowly descend back onto the ground. He could visibly see the four tendrils attempting to go in and suck off the blood that the blonde was bleeding out in the milliliters. Boom! A large burst of sound, dust, and debris exploded from the entrance of the relatively empty warehouse. "I am here." An ominously disgruntled voice that Izuku could recognize from a mile away boomed into the warehouse. "Tisk, shit," Kinturret mumbled under his breath as Kurogiri began to form a portal underneath himself, and the less muscular blonde, the blood still dripping from his stump arm. "We will get you one day," All Might the Mist Man stated as he sank through the portal. Not wanting to risk injuring the hostage, All Might decided not to attack the villains. He grit his teeth even harder as he let them pass by scot-free. He knew that he wasn't in the right state of mind. He might even decimate the entire warehouse if he wasn't careful enough. He had too much rage to fight the two, especially since there was a child in the danger zone. Izuku stared wide-eyed at the muscular man in front of him. He ignored the tentacles inching their way to suck off the blood on the floor and the cut arm that was dropped. All Might stared at the boy with pitying, yet shocked eyes. The blue glowing pupils shone through the black sockets, intrigued as crimson tendrils cleaned the area of blood as it even sucked a dismembered arm off of blood. But that wasn't the most revolting thing All Might saw. He scanned the room as he stepped towards the child. He saw a dead body which, judging by appearance, was also sucked dry off of blood. All Might's heart sank deeper than the Titanic as he saw the child's eyes. He had the eyes of someone who had just killed. As he approached, the tendrils acted, taking on a defensive stance as All Might flinched upon seeing this. He raised his two arms up, a sign of peace. "It's okay. He means and no harm," Izuku mumbled, trying to communicate to the demons in his head. The appendages relaxed a bit after he told them. "Izuku Midoriya," another voice called out as Izuku raised his head towards a black-haired man rushing towards the scene. The tendrils around him raising up in a defensive position once more. Tsukachi Naomasa, at your service. Your mother has hired me on your case. I just didn't know that it was this bad, Naomasa said with a dry chuckle as he tried to make the situation less tense. Izuku froze for a moment. A surge of relief coursed through his body as the tentacles began to swirl, and before back into floating liquids the boy broke down and began to sob into All Might's large arms. The blonde held the boy protectively. He scowled as he took note on how the boy's innocence was taken from him at such a young age. He swore that he would bring those that wronged the boy to justice, especially since All for One was involved with the case at hand. It's all right, young one, you're safe, for I am here, the muscular man said as he patted the boy in the back as he felt the boy tears wet his shoulders. We should contact Mrs. Midoriya and the police. I think this boy has seen enough for one night, Naomasa stated as All Might nodded in response. Kurogiri and Kunturut dropped into the floor of the bar as the two brushed off the dirt from their descent. Kunturut scowled as he let the child pass right through his fingers, and he took his arm with him. Where's the boy? The screen across the bar filled up with the ominous static accompanied with the equally ominous voice. Kunturut stiffened. Kurogiri tensed as he heard the voice. Kunturut tensed even more as he registered the blood dripping onto the floorboards. Hello sensei, Kunturut replied shakingly, his shaky voice betraying his calm visage. What happened to your left arm, Kunturut? Sensei said with his threateningly deep voice. The sweat from Kunturut began to seep through his suit. The child was more trouble than I had thought. He had even managed to kill Quirk with his quirk. Sensei, there was more to it than simple immortality, Kunturut retorted, clearly nervous. I would guess that the boy had something to do with blood, yes? Sensei asked, his voice becoming intrigued. Oh, why yes, Sensei, Kunturut responded. His blood swirls around him like a shield. His blood could even turn into tentacles while it could effortlessly block steel and pick the boy up effortlessly. I see. Sensei's voice seemed cheerful for a moment. Get yourself patched up, Kunturut. There are plans that still need your service. Not missing the underlying threat, Kunturut responded with an affirming yes. But the meat of the matter was that his life was spared, at least for now. Inko's phone rang. After the whole scene with Mitsuki, the teal-haired woman honestly felt drained of all life. She sighed as she wiped her face off of tears. Even though Mitsuki had scolded her of her self-destructive ways, habits die hard. So Inko begrudgingly walked up to the small coffee table in the living room as picked up the phone. Her heart immediately began to race as she saw the caller ID. Naomasa Tsukachi. Her heart got caught into her throat as she picked the phone up and accepted the call. Mrs. Midoriya. The oh-so-calm voice of Naomasa spoke through the phone. Why yes, she asked, worryingly. We found him. Drop Dead Dullahan Chapter 7. The ambulance sirens were blaring. Toshinori took out his handkerchief to wipe off the sweat on his brow. The night was one of his more stressful nights. He took a peek at the woman sobbing while she stroked her unconscious child's hair. He had never seen someone cry for this long. Then again, he hasn't seen a child kill a man after being held captive for an oh-so-long amount of time. It was pretty much justified. Oh, Izuku. Inko sobbed, her breath hitched with her silent weeps for her son. Such a tragic case. Toshinori insisted to Naomasa that he accompany the mother and son duo rather than riding shotgun again in his car. The gaunt man hummed in thought. He needed a way to monitor this child without making it seem as though he was a prisoner in his own flesh, especially so since All for One was after his hide. He could only imagine the horrors of an immortal All for One. The man was already quite old. His ways of dodging death defied any kind of conclusion Toshinori could come up with. There was a slow stir of movement that the man presumed was Izuku regaining his consciousness. The stirring bags of blood was probably another sign of his waking. The blonde man shuddered at the thought of what kind of demise the person torturing this young mind succumbed to. Tentacles and tendrils of blood that could slice, strangle, and pierce opponents is already quite a fearsome power in of itself. Add the little fact that it makes the use virtually immortal, and you have a very dangerous and very envied quirk. Though, looking at him now, the holder of said quirk didn't look to be in too good of a shape. Scrawny, pale, and disheveled were words one would use to describe this boy. Then again, anyone would look like that after experiencing hell. There was a soft groan. The bags of blood within the ambulance dropped dead, only moving when the ambulance bumped up. There was a second that passed, silence. Izuku's eyes were empty, dead. His features were noticeably more disheveled, but something was amiss. Toshinori couldn't help but notice. He had an inkling of a feeling that something wasn't right. The boy rose from the ambulance stretcher, the straps getting ripped effortlessly, his eyes blinking open and showing flashes of yellow occasionally before it settled for its homely verdant coloration. The boy gasped, the bags of blood suddenly bursting and surrounding the green-haired teen. The hospital staff within the vehicle prepared themselves for possible sedation of the teen. They readied the needles for sedation while the driver of the ambulance took a glance back and considered stopping the vehicle. Izuku, it's fine. You're safe. Inko stood up, holding onto the railing to make sure she didn't fall. She shook Izuku's body, the blood within the bags now pooling up and forming tendrils around the boy. The scarlet tentacles attached themselves around his back and arms, emitting an ominous growl from God knows where. It acted like a dog protecting its master. Izuku took an empty glance around him, his now lazy eyes sweeping around within the hospital van. It took a few moments before his figure became more relaxed, the tendrils attached to his back and around his arms slowly slouching and settling down to resting along the boy's figure. "I am sorry," he spoke out, looking down slightly, regret clear evident on his face. "We're here." The driver spoke out, the staff within the ambulance trying to help Izuku unstrap from the remaining strips of leather. They were about to help the boy with his angioplasty, but the boy was already one step ahead. The blood tentacles precariously picked the metal rack with their red appendages. The two staff members shared a confused glance with each other before shrugging. They helped push the stretcher out and into the hospital. Inko followed. All Might actually stopped for a moment before reasoning out that he needed a moment to himself for a bit. "So, verdict." Naomasa spoke out while Tashinori entered the room. "I'm not quite sure on what to make of it. All for One clearly has his sights set on that child, first with the kidnappings. And now I can safely say he is definitely behind this. That smoke guy back there was one of his grunts. He was always his ticket out of a mess." The now deflated hero replied, now seated and resting his chin onto his palm. Naomasa rubbed his chin and thought, that kid was in danger. More so now that he killed one of All for One's men. And not just any grunt, he took down the best tracker the villain had. The detective let out a huff of breath while thinking, surely there had to be some way of keeping the child under watch without making him feel like a caged bird. And by the looks of his mother, Naomasa didn't want to add to the kid's problems. "Hey Toshi." Naomasa called out to the slim hero, "What happened to that offer Yue gave you? You know, the whole teaching staff job." Yagi rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly before replying. That. I haven't replied yet. I'm honestly at a loss for the moment. A lot of stuff is going on and I'm not sure if I have the time to stay there. The detective nodded, reaching for the cup of coffee by the table. He grabbed Izuku's files and studied for a bit. He looked at the information, specifically his education. A grade student. Perfect. You know Toshi, you could protect the boy. I'm sure that All for One is dying to get a quirk like that in his little collection and I'm not sure when or where he might strike next to get a hold of that kid. Naomasa spoke out, pointing to the hero with the ball pen he got from the files. "Me? No, I couldn't. I don't nearly have the time to keep watch on him, and besides, there are pro heroes far more qualified than me for bodyguard duty. I'm not as young as I used to be." All Might got a grim expression on his face while he patted down on his chest. "And you know I don't have that much time to prance around. I need to find a successor." "Exactly, this is your chance Toshi. Look here." The detective gestured the pro hero to look onto the files of a young Midoriya, to show his alarmingly high grades throughout the years. I see." Tashinori spoke out, a bead of sweat running down his sharp chin. "And this means, what, exactly?" he asked, understanding absolutely nothing. "I means he's fit for UA. And you can keep him in sight while you're searching for your little protege. Think about it, he's got the wits to get in, and with a quirk like that." Naomasa explained, All Might's eyes slightly widening at the thought. "Of course. But, with a quirk that dangerous, would it be wise to keep him there? I've seen it kill a hardened criminal without the child batting an eye. Heaven knows what it would do if it had more surrounding it." The blonde spoke out, the detective nodded in response. "All the more reason for putting him in UA. We have people there that can help him with that problem. You've seen what he can do Tashinori, why not give it a chance?" The blonde rubbed his chin and hummed in thought. "But we know that it isn't our decision where to put him, right? Right, the child's consent. And possibly his mother's consent as well. Naomasa's fear right now is that, due to emotion, his mother might make an irrational decision about Izuku. We'll just have to ask them, when he's feeling better then." The detective spoke while Tashinori crossed his arms and nodded. "Sounds like a plan." His mother cut no expenses in medical scans for the boy. CAT scans, fibrous scans, and even MRIs were dished out onto the boy. It took a whole week and more just for the results to come in. She was worried, any mother would be, really. Just seeing her son with no emotion other than pure emptiness and sorrow was something that wrenched her gut. She felt horrible. She was sitting down, Izuku was on a hospital bed, sleeping. There were 6 buckets by his bedside, full of blood that followed him around wherever he was. The nursing staff were a bit intimidated in mopping it up and putting it in buckets, but Inko didn't want to bother them more than she already had. The door creaked open, the teal-haired woman gazed upon the doctor. Midoriya. Could you come to my office for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." Oh no, something clicked in her head. This wasn't sounding good. Inko swallowed a good amount of saliva before sheepishly nodding and slowly following the doctor. The doctor noticed Inko's reluctance to leave the boy, so he spoke out. "I'll have a couple of nurses watch over him while we're gone. Don't worry, I'll try and make it quick." Inko nodded and followed suit. The doctor led her several halls away from the room where Izuku resided in. It took them a couple of minutes before the doctor led her into a small office. She took a seat in front of his desk while he fished out a couple of documents from his file cabinet. "Before anything Midoriya-san, I'd like to say that your son, at the moment, is stable. Like I read in his last checkup, he's pretty malnourished. But look here." The doctor motioned Inko to take a closer look at the pictures he had showed her. It was of a brain highlighted in hues of blue, yellow, and even red. "If you look here, this part of the brain is highlighted in mostly red. which can show high levels of stress or possibly mental disorders. Now, due to his situation, the doctor emphasized the word, noticing how tightly Inko was gripping the chair armrests and how she was shivering. Due to that, Izuku might have some complications. Now, I can't tell exactly what it would be, but the most probable thing would be PTSD. Of course, there have been cases where patients manage to overcome their traumas. I can't really say that Izuku here would be the same. There's always something different with each patient. I would suggest monitoring the child in case. So far, the kid is looking well aside from a few things here and there, which can be easily fixed by a few meds. My only concern is his mental state. He added. Inko took mental note and had a small sigh of relief. But the doctor spoke again. Inko's attention was back on the doctor. There's something that we found, which is concerning. Look here. The man pulled out several large sheets. X-rays. There was something with your son that caught our eyes. The doctor pointed to an abdomen shot of her son. It was an X-ray, but she didn't really see what was wrong except from the break from the neck and head. His quirk, which you've registered named Mugen or the nickname Dullahan, is one of the strangest quirks we've ever seen. Mostly because it serves no functional purpose to dismember his head. But we found something else, specifically in his bones and blood. Nowadays, it doesn't seem that far off for a quirk to have a mind of its own, or even a quirk being a separate entity from its user. There are numerous cases throughout where a quirk was self-conscious. I even have a patient that has a shadow creature within them. Sounds crazy, I know. But it exists, and I have an inkling that your boy is the same. He spoke out. So you're saying there's something in Izuku? Something alive? Inko asked worryingly. Well, yes. You see here. The doctor pointed to Izuku's ribs on the X-ray. See all those lines within his skeleton? That isn't his nerves or anything. It looks like the bone have a separate nervous system form its host. It's astonishing. And his blood, it's like nothing we've seen. He started once more, tucking away the X-ray scans and taking a piece of paper from Izuku's medical files. His blood has what normal humans have, but there seem to be iridophores and chromatophores mixed in. I see, but what does that mean? Exactly. Inko hadn't the slightest clue on what the man was saying, but this was important, especially since she now knows that there was something else in her son, something alive within his body. Well, it means a number of things, but the most notable one is that, in theory, he could possibly change his skin texture and color. Either him or his quirk is responsible for that, who knows? Inko was sweating. She didn't know what to make of this. She didn't know what to make of Izuku's future now that he had this in him. And we haven't even begun digging into what he can do. Wake up, Izuku groaned, his mind muddy from all the narcotics he's ingested. Wake up, he gasped and sat up. He looked around to see no one was in his room. His hospital room. He felt a slight sting from the IV injected into his arm. Moving suddenly wasn't the best idea. He rubbed his eyes free of sleepiness. He moved his body slowly, avoiding further messing up the IV attached to him. Mirror. His feet dangled from the bed frame. He groggily moved from the bed and slowly traversed towards the bathroom. Thankfully, there was one relatively close by. And it was in his room too. Ugh. The green-haired boy groaned. His eyes were still blurry from sleeping and his hair was a mess. Well, a bigger mess than usual. He rubbed his neck, a phantom pain from a time he didn't want to remember. He coughed a bit and washed his face with the cold water from the hospital. He grabbed a towel and wiped himself off. He took a glance at the mirror. Izuku moved his face a bit to the side and glanced down his neck through the reflective surface. Red, sore, and stitched, he let his hand brush over it. He opened the wound a bit with two of his fingers. No pain. Still unhealed. Would it ever heal? He huffed, scratching his head. He started to walk back to his bed. He needed more rest. Wait. Izuku stopped and looked around. He gripped the IV stand a bit while looking around. The boy gave a tired sigh and rubbed his neck. Great. He's hearing voices now. Mirror, there it was again. Was he going insane? He knows he's been through a lot, and by God he tries not to remember, but was he going mad? He was convinced that something was off, way off, as he was hearing stuff. Izuku went back to the bathroom. Reluctantly, he stared back at the mirror. All he saw was the pathetic green-haired kid that got himself into trouble and made his mother spend more than a fortune staring back at him. In an instant, a portion of his face seemed to melt off, revealing his skeleton with a yellow ear-eyed eye. Hello. Izuku's mouth moved without his volition. He screamed, at least, he tried to. Izuku screamed, but his voice never came out. He stumbled and fell. The only thing that helped him from falling flat on his face was the IV stand that he gripped. He heard the buckets by his bed move, and before he knew it, the boy was back up on his 2 feet. Shhh. Don't grab their attention. He was breathing heavily at this point and sweating as well. Izuku frantically looked back at the mirror to now see half his face gone. His left side was dug down, showing his skeleton and an eye with a yellow iris. It was surreal. Izuku opened his mouth. His tongue was still there. He brushed his face carefully. He was scared of whatever was, or was lacking on him. He moved his head a bit to see the separation between skin and bone, like only blood was what separated the two. He couldn't feel his own touch on his face, his skeleton. It felt real. What's going on? He half screamed, mostly for himself. But he didn't expect someone to respond. Izuku's arm covered his mouth as it melted back into its skeletal frame. blood spilling into the floor. The green-haired teen struggled before his arm released his mouth. Don't make too much noise, the staff will come if you're too noisy. His own skeleton spoke out. Izuku blinked several times and touched his face, then his arms, then his face again. Oh my god, this is real. Izuku stuttered out, looking at the mirror more closely and frantically moving his head to see if it was real or not. Yes it is, idiot. Now listen to me and stop screaming. Izuku's mouth shut without his own volition. Now listen, for I'm only going to explain this once. Izuku's head moved towards the window within the bathroom, moving the curtains out of the way. He heard a grunt and his face flexed into a frown. He couldn't control his own body. So it's true. This thing controlling his body hummed for a moment. Where are we? It asked, walking back Izuku's body to the mirror where the boy stared back at the skeletal half of his face. I don't know. A hospital in Kyoto, Japan. The boy stuttered out, sweating while looking at his own skull. I see. The blood from the floor creeped back up and covered his arms, reverting it back to flesh and muscle opposed to the white bones it was moments ago. I have no idea where I am. He didn't even notice that his arms had melted into bone in the first place. Who are you? His mouth flexed out of his control. He was frightened. He didn't even know that he wasn't in control of his own body until he heard that voice. Fairly higher pitched but gravely, he heard aggression. Izuku Midoriya. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. His body latched onto the sink and his face plunged into the mirror. Izuku wanted to close his eyes but he simply couldn't. It looked like his left side was inspecting his right side on the mirror, bone inspecting flesh. I never thought it would have happened so soon. It huffed and shook its head in thought. All right, listen up. It commanded. It has come to my attention that my previous host has passed, and it seems that I have been reborn within you. There was a certain sheen its eye had when it spoke of Izuku. He didn't know if this was good or bad. His left arm melted back into bones held up by God knows what. You. It paused, pointing to the boy through the mirror. Are pathetic. If my previous host ever saw you, you'd be nothing more than a drop within the sea of blood we've collected. Izuku's throat tightened in guilt. It was true. Hell, even this thing inside of him knew of how much of a waste of space he was. But Izuku perked up, not physically though, but it did manage to grab his attention. Due to the mere fact that I am within you means you have potential like no other. Together we shall drench the streets in blood and gore until we are no more. But first, it paused. Izuku saw himself smirking on the mirror. That wasn't him. His own skull started to speak once more. A brief history of me and how I came to be. Izuku, no, this thing looked down. The green hair teen did as well since they were connected. The blood pooled down on the bathroom floor, raised up and slowly forged itself into a long golden staff with what appeared to be a scarab design and a crescent bottom. It nonchalantly moved and rested its two arms and body on the staff, leaning forward into the mirror with almost smug finesse. Izuku wasn't in control. He doubted he could move his body on his own volition again. I am, in simple terms, a parasite. How I ended up within you, I haven't the slightest clue. But how I was reborn, that I do know. Izuku was alert. His sweat dripped into the floor while his mouth moved. All he could do was listen. His mouth moved again, despite his protest. A long time ago, I had a host. She craved power, so I gave it to her. But her thirst grew and grew, decimating whole cities and draining every person that she could find. It rejuvenated her, kept her young. She was centuries old. But she too was scared of death. So she searched and searched for a trump card. Something to make her truly immortal. I didn't object. I was but a tool for her wild ride she called life. But alas, sometime during that life, she had found it. They have called it a life gem. We stole it from an old family, the Midoriya family. Izuku was listening, both intrigued and frightened by its tale. There was a pause, almost like the skeleton was trying to look for the word it would say next. We took it, she absorbed it. Rumors said that it would protect the user from unnatural death. The teen's mouth moved in an unnatural fashion, almost like his jaw was going to fall off when this parasite gave a dry chuckle. Only an unnatural death. But lo and behold, it gave her pseudo-immortality. The only thing keeping us up was draining people of their blood, infinite life. But we've ran out. There was a certain bitterness to the parasite's voice that Izuku couldn't pinpoint, like it was regretful. It had emotions. We couldn't stray from the country. We didn't have any means of practical transportation that could take us outside the country. She was stubborn, saying that there are still people that are still there, but we couldn't find any. I couldn't even feel it when we died. I didn't even know that we were dead until I woke up in someone completely different, in a place where I know nothing about. There was an almost suffocating silence. Izuku had felt like he could not speak, could not move, and most of all, he couldn't control himself. All this time the parasite was speaking. All he thought about was control of himself, and if he was ever going to get it back, it was scary. Izuku was scared. Who are you? Izuku was surprised that he could move his mouth, but took back that thought when his body stopped leaning and slowly straightened up to look at himself in the mirror more properly. The staff melted back into blood, spilling all over the bathroom tiles. I go by many names. The blood crept back up into his arms and formed back into flesh and blood. Neferu, the Crimson Scourge, but most commonly. There was another pause. Izuku's mouth twitched a bit. He didn't know if it was him or the parasite. Sekhmet, now I have a question for you. Izuku's head turned suddenly, making a loud cracking sound before returning and facing himself in the mirror. Why is my head severed? And what has happened to this world? I sense many of my brothers and sisters about. Izuku decided not to answer the first question, his throat gripping on itself and his words not coming out quite right. He didn't want to remember, be brothers and sisters. How do you sense them? He asked nervously. There was a pause before Sekhmet replied aggravatingly. I just do. I can sense them everywhere, in almost everyone here. What has happened to this world? Izuku's mouth was still. He didn't know how to reply. Tell me, have you noticed anyone with peculiar abilities? Disfigured bodies. Possibly alterations to their bodies. Izuku blinked, twice. Abilities. Disfigured bodies. Was Sekhmet talking about quirks? People have quirks, things that give them power. Like they're born with them. There are like 3 types. Mutant, emitter, and transformation quirks that are like passed down from their parents. And that's what dictates what their quirk is. Sorry, I don't know all that much about it. He stuttered, spluttered, and drove on about quirks. He had knowledge of them, sure. But Sekhmet noticed how much he opposed to him have any knowledge of anything. A timid and shy soul, annoying was a word the parasite would use to describe him. I see. Without his control, his body moved towards the window while his hand was rubbing his chin. So they did manage to spread their influence. But to what extent? Sekhmet hummed in thought. Both Izuku's and Sekhmet's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone opening the door. Izuku's arms melted and in an instant, tentacles pulled him back towards the bed while carrying the IV stand alongside him. His face reconstructed itself and both his eyes matched back into their usual verdant color. He was pissed, not for the reasons you might imagine. But Katsuki was pissed. For the longest fucking time, his mother, and his father was fucking helping Deku's mom in looking for the snot-nosed nerd. But, despite all of this, his parents had the gall of sending him over with fuck all flowers of all things to check if he was alright. He's your classmate, they said. You were best friends back in the day. He spoke to himself in a low disgruntled whisper while almost strangling the flowers that he carried. He asked the person behind the desk where Izuku's room was, 112, whatever. He rode the elevator and stopped by the 3rd floor. Fucking hell, you'd think that they'd put someone who just went missing into a closer room towards the exit. After a long, monotonous walk, he finally arrived. He knocked. No response. Tusk. He clicked his tongue in annoyance. The blonde didn't have time for this. He didn't want to see Izuku, especially with what he's done to him. He knocked once more. Harsher. Knock, knock, knock. Oi, Katsuki yelled, getting some looks from other people passing by. He tried turning the doorknob several times before he heard shuffling within the room. See coming. The blonde heard behind the door. Soon enough the door creaked open and Bakugo let himself in with the door slamming behind him. Take-a. Izuku shut his mouth when he saw the pure anger of the other boy's face. Be Bakugo-san. Izuku interjected. There was a slight twitch on the blonde's eyebrows before he almost begrudgingly placed the bunch of flowers and letter on the desk beside Izuku's bed. There was a silence. A long and awkward silence roaming through the hospital room. The air was dense too. So dense and heavy that someone could bust right in and cut it with a butter knife. Katsuki tightened his fists, begrudgingly looking back at Izuku. It was like a spear piercing his heart whenever he saw those horrendous scars around the green-haired teen's neck. It even worsened when he saw those dark bags underneath his eyes, the disheveled and glazed look he had with his eyes. The fact that he could almost see the bone on his arms and torso terrified him. It angered him. Why? Izuku rose his head a bit and perked up. Looking back at Bakugo shaking. Why was he shaking? The blonde grit his teeth and rubbed his nose. His eyes were teary. His voice shaky and primal. Why'd you fucking do this to yourself, huh? Izuku rolled back a bit, seeing the utter anger in the boy's face, and the wretched pain in his tears. He opened his mouth for a bit, not being able to find the words that he had wanted to say. Do you know how many fucking people are going out of their way just to keep you in check? Huh, nerd. They always try and fucking keep you in sight. They fucking work night and day to keep your bitch ass in line. And what do? Huh? You step on them and disrespect them. You hurt yourself fucking not thinking of all the people caring for you. He almost screamed out. Something broke. Izuku's eye twitched, and his mouth moved slightly. Something snapped. Why do you care? Izuku replied. As far as I know, you're not one of those people. You've never cared. You're not fooling anyone into thinking that you're someone that cares for me whatsoever. You're the entire reason why I even got into this mess in the first place. The green-haired teen replied back. He was calm. His voice didn't crack, he stuttered, but that was a part of his speech pattern. We've already talked about this, it's done. I've done it, it's because you and your posse couldn't leave me alone for 2 seconds without messing with my stuff, without insulting me, or without talking behind my back like I can't hear your loud voices. Bakugo was taken aback and blinked before rubbing his eyes and nose. This nerd had grown some balls the last time he had seen him. Unknown to both Izuku and Katsuki, someone else was listening. Sekhmet was listening. It knew of Izuku's supposed death and his kidnapping, but this was the first time it had any actual context to his decapitation and kidnapping. Izuku's blood pressure was rising. Sekhmet didn't do anything about it. He felt that the boy needed this if he was going to be a good host. The parasite decided to watch a bit before intervention was needed. I know that it's not my fucking job to tell you this shit, but I wanted to, because I have to sit around and listen to all the god-awful things that happen to you. It's like a fucking broken radio. Not only do I have to hear it from my old man and hag at home, but I hear it from your mom too. Don't you think about what she would feel if she knew about that scar of yours? Huh, you're just a selfish kid who think the world wronged him. Well, guess what, cunt? The world doesn't owe you jack diddly shit. And you always think that I'm the source of all your problems, huh? I lose a lot of hours of fucking sleep just thinking about the shit I've done, and yet you go about and give it all up because someone said mean things about me. Grow up. Katsuki ranted, pure venom, pure primal emotion oozing through his speech. Izuku flexed his mouth, even getting up from his bed. But even before he could say a word, he heard Sekhmet. Bakugo stepped back a bit, mostly in shock and fright on what he saw. Katsuki saw Izuku's face split down the middle, leaving his skull with yellow ear-eyed eyeballs within the sockets. Worst part is seeing two halves of his face by the side. It was like a zipper, a serial killer's mask. We've heard your part, sonny boy, that would be all, thank you. Now if you would please exit the room. Even the teen's empty eyes and misattached mouth moved as the skull spoke out. Soon enough the buckets underneath the bed moved and morphed into tentacles as they shoved Katsuki away from Izuku, opening the door and literally throwing the boy out. The tentacles then proceeded to lock the door. There were several bangs on the door before it stopped. Izuku heard stomping and then silence once more. A half of his face merged back into his skull, a gasp of air that he'd been missing during the whole scene with his parasite. Why'd you have to do that? I still had something to say. Izuku spoke out, coughing a bit and rubbing his neck. A side of his face open with the same blood-separating skull and flesh with the yellow eye. Because, any more words from that boy and I'd feel a heart attack from you, even though we don't have one. Your blood pressure rose alarmingly fast and high. You were starting to become irrational with your speech, I could feel it. You shouldn't be driven so much by emotion like you are. The parasite lectured Izuku. I could have told him off. I don't need your help in this. The teen added, his left skull rolled its eye. Right, I do have to say though, you definitely have dynamic people in your life. I wonder how they react when they see the monster inside you. Izuku shivered. There was a distinct line that made his skin crawl. He felt his jaw move up and down as he heard the parasite let out a howl of laughter. Sekhmet started speaking again after a fit of laughter. This is going to be fun, seeing a brand new world we can destroy. But we need to make you stronger. You are but a weakling amongst weaklings. Like a paper surrounded by cardboard. We need to fix that. Izuku's eye twitched for a moment as he rubbed his neck, feeling the phantom pain. He didn't know what was ahead for him. Won't you join me in this path?